Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the Cameron Parker Show podcast. And I am happy, as always, to be joined by one of the many friends of the program, and obviously one of my good friends that I've had the opportunity of interacting with in the times of when he's been over at Predominantly Orange. Now he's over at Mile High Huddle, and he's over with the Building the Broncos podcast as part of Mile High Huddle, which is part of 24/7 Sports. Carl Dumler, the beard, has joined the Cameron Parker Show podcast. How you doing, my man?
I am doing great. I am just having a wonderful day, relaxing, enjoying it. It's freezing out here. We're supposed to get like 10 inches of snow dumped on us. And so I'm just like, man, I'm just going to hang out by the fire, drink some coffee, talk a little football. So there's nothing better than that to me.
I mean, yeah. I mean, the fact that the AAF has sort of started up, it's literally like you're staring at a baseball season, which is like 162 games. I mean, it's cool.
It is, and it's one of those things. You know, all of us we can't get enough football, and so adding this little league in here, and it's. I mean, from what I've seen, the ratings wise, this thing is kicking off big time. Even NBA games can't compete with their ratings. So it just shows all of us, we can't get enough of the football world.
Yeah, I think it legitimately I think what you're talking about was there was a game. And I can't think of what it was, but it outviewed the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Houston Rockets, which if you guys follow basketball, Russell Westbrook is on the Oklahoma City Thunder, and James Harden and Chris Paul are on the Houston Rockets. So the fact that a AAF league, or should we say the NFL minor league, even though it has not even been converted into it yet, outviewed in a true competitive NBA game. I mean, that to me just is incredible.
You forgot about Paul George. I just want to throw his name out there because he's a pretty big star too.
He's okay.
But no, you're right. It's just crazy how much we love football. I mean, we're a football country. That's exactly what we are. And again, I mean, we're 2 weeks from the NFL season being done, or 3 weeks, maybe 2 weeks, two and a half weeks, I guess. And here we are. We still just want more football. It's the season ends and everybody goes into a panic. And I think I saw something the other day. We're 24 weeks away from the start of the season.
And that's crazy to me because, I mean, I think we all sort of feel like there's that dead time in the NFL, but in reality, in the times that I've been looking at it, there honestly is no dead time because you have the draft scouting, which is the All-Star games, the East-West Shrine game, the Senior Bowl, the NFL Combine, which is actually supposed to be kicking off next week, I believe on Monday.
Yep.
And then you have NFL free agency, which is going to happen mid-March, which is not far either. And then a month after that, you have the draft. So I think that as far as NFL action, so to speak, like games, what have you, that will obviously take some time. But as far as news and rumors and, collegiate pro-am games, that doesn't die.
Right. No, it's the only dead time I guess you could maybe say would be that May to middle of June when training camp kind of starts. And so that's kind of the only time you're sitting there going, please, NFL players, don't go do something stupid. Don't shoot yourself in the leg, Aqib Talib. Those kind of things. But beyond that, it's a 365, 24/7 kind of sport. And I mean, you look at even today, what was the top story in sports? Robert Kraft. And I mean, it was for a very bad thing, of course, but it's still, right. I mean, that's going to be the big news for the next week of what's going to happen with that.
If not more.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, especially because it's the Patriots and Patriots news can take over like crazy. I mean, you have Deflategate that lasted an entire summer. I mean, I got tired of it, and I'm sure everybody else did too, but it was the top sports news story forever.
Actually, it was not even a summer. The Deflategate, if I remember right, the Deflategate lasted, wasn't it like a year and a half?
Oh, at least. I mean, we're still talking about it today, even because
Right.
again, it's the Patriots, the Cheatriots, or however you say that. But it just like I said, NFL news, even the smallest thing. I mean, every time that Antonio Brown tweets, the internet shuts down
Hmm.
because everybody just goes crazy of, oh, what did he mean by that? And so
Yeah.
again, it's just the way the NFL world works, and I love it because we love the NFL and it gives us plenty of things to talk about. And this is, for me, this is my favorite time of year. We're
Hmm.
getting ready for the Combine, Senior Bowl just a couple weeks ago. Oh my gosh, I'm in football heaven right now.
Which sort of leads it to what we want to talk about, because there was a slew. Well, I shouldn't say that. There was a bombshell move. There was a bombshell move, and now, granted, and I sort of wrote about it in the article that I did over at Predominantly Orange. Is that, in all honesty, the trade of Joe Flacco, while it was a bombshell, wasn't in essence surprising, so to say, because it led back to, if you look at the hiring of Vic Fangio, and which probably, if you pair him with the other coach that was brought on, would still probably lead you to say that, hey, it's not all that surprising. But the fact that John Elway and Vic Fangio were able to come together and say, hey, let's bring on a coach whose job I stole in Mike Munchak as the offensive line coach, as sort of a power play move. And you and I were talking as far as just how ecstatic you and I were that they were able to bring in Mike Munchak as the offensive line coach, because it is really rare that you see a coach where a guy was hired and he basically comes to the team who stole his job. Now, granted, obviously family ties and what have you, there's that pull, and then having that translate into going and getting Joe Flacco. In essence, the move really wasn't all that surprising.
The move to get Munchak after not giving him the head coach job has to be within the top 10 moves that Elway has ever pulled off. I mean, of course, you have Peyton Manning at the top. You got Von Miller, number 2, of getting him number 2 in the draft. Because, I mean, hindsight, everybody's sitting there going, oh, that was an easy pick. But at that time, most people were not thinking Von Miller was going to be the pick. And
It
so
was Marcel Darius, if I
him
remember.
or um, Peterson for the Cardinals.
Mm-hmm.
He was the other one that people were like, oh, yeah, they need a cornerback to play opposite of Champ Bailey. And they ended up going Von Miller. And, of course, he's been maybe – I mean, you could argue best player from that draft.
Yeah.
Some would say second best, depending on your thoughts on J.J. Watt and all of his injuries. I would take Von Miller because he's been more consistently healthy. But, yeah, I mean, again, that's the second best move. But getting Munchak after saying, hey, you're not good enough to be our head coach, but, yeah, we still want you. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And it just, I mean, I was watching the documentary of McCartney, the old Colorado coach.
Yeah, Bill McCartney.
Yeah, and I had to laugh because he made fun of Nebraska a lot.
You know
And
what?
he said,
I will say, though, that was probably one of the more impressive 30 for 30s that I can remember.
yeah, it was powerful. Like, I was exhausted when I started it, and I'm like, I'll just watch 10 minutes. I watched the entire thing, and I'm going, oh my gosh, I got to get up at 5 a.m. And I just watched an hour and a half thing. But his comments of, hey, this is Colorado. Like, I can sell a kid on Colorado more than Nebraska or Oklahoma. And I'm going, yeah, that's true. I'd rather go to the mountains than the middle of nowhere. But no, I mean, again, got Munchak in the place. It gives the Broncos a lot of leeway where it's not where you have to go absolutely spend tons and tons of money to build up the offensive line to make them good. It's not that you have to use all these great picks in the draft or first or second rounders to fill out the offensive line. You got a guy that is absolutely known as one of the best developmental coaches in all of the NFL. And in that case, I mean, Garrett Bowles has to be ecstatic. Hopefully he's going to put in the work and become great. McGovern, again, he's another one. we'll see what they do with the rest of the offensive line. But beyond that, I mean, it attracts other guys to want to come in because, hey, I get to work with one of the best at my position. And I don't know. It was great. Then getting Joe Flacco. I know there's a lot of Bronco fans, but it's been kind of funny. Like the initial response, and I was not a big Joe Flacco fan.
No, yeah.
Yeah, I was not exactly.
I teased you
I
I teased you in our group chats. I mean, I think I sent like the Peyton Manning, edit of him and Joe Flacco
Yep.
like 18 times that day that they did that or something, and yeah.
Yeah, that day tested our friendship.
Yeah, no kidding.
But no, I mean, it's one of those emotionally in the moment. You're sitting there going, "This is so stupid," and then you give it a week, and you're sitting there going, "Okay, this starts making a lot more sense." One, if they can get Case Keenum traded, it's pretty much even money of what the quarterback position is going to cost anyway. Two, he's a better fit with the type of offensive system that they want to run. Three, he is a better quarterback than Case Keenum. I mean, it's not like this huge gap of say Russell Wilson compared to Case Keenum, but I mean, we're talking at least an upgrade at the position. And it makes a lot of sense, especially, I mean, we'll talk about the draft here in a little bit, but there's a certain quarterback in the draft that very much has a game very similar to Joe Flacco. And so if they get him, it makes even more sense for the Broncos. I was told today that there's a chance that they're going to be talking to Joe Flacco about redoing his contract even. So it could end up that the quarterback position actually has a lower cap hit with Joe Flacco than that with Case Keenum.
Yeah.
And when you add all that up, you're sitting here saying, okay, this really does make sense. And all it cost you was a 4th-round pick. I mean, if you look at the Broncos and their draft history, it's not great there in the 4th round. It's nothing to sit there and write home about, at least I would say. I'm trying to remember some of their 4th-round picks. They had Max Garcia. I mean, he started some, but he wasn't great, got benched.
He's still on the roster. He had a
right.
Good,
well, he's not quite on the roster. He's going to be a free agent.
Right.
Omar Bolden, Philip Blake. I mean, are these names that jump off the tables? Or, I mean, Julius Thomas is probably the best 4th-round pick that Elway made.
I mean, there's probably an argument once Omar Bolden started turning into a corner, but I mean, no, not really. I mean,
right.
I mean, yeah, theoretically, I mean, Julius Thomas is probably the best 4th round. And I mean, who knows, say the guys that they just drafted this year, or I mean, not this year, but last year, in arguably one of the most epic draft classes that John Elway and the front office ever had.
Yeah, and I think those 2 picks from this last year, Josie Jewell and Deshaun Hamilton, I think they'll be good contributors for the Broncos moving forward. And so, I mean, I'm not worried about that, but it's still, I mean, to upgrade the most important position on the field for only a 4th-round pick, and you might pay less at the position than you were with the other guy that's worse off, that's a pretty good trade-off. And so I think with more hindsight into this whole thing, and as we get more pieces of the puzzle moving forward, of maybe he redoes his deal, maybe they draft a certain quarterback, there's just a lot of things that make a lot of sense for the Broncos moving forward with this trade. And so, I mean, it's not my favorite trade that Elway's ever made. He's not any quarterback that's going to sit there and make you go, oh my gosh, we just became Super Bowl contenders. I don't think that of Joe Flacco. I think he needs a good team around him. I mean, you look back 2012, he had a lot of pieces around him. He had a strong running game. I mean, he had some lucky throws in the playoffs that worked out well for him and his team. He had some defensive pieces that were, I mean, they were at the end of their career, but they were still Hall of Fame players. And I mean, we see when you have that kind of leadership on your roster, I mean, that's what the Broncos had in 2015. Peyton Manning wasn't Peyton Manning, but he was still a great leader. DeMarcus Ware wasn't prime DeMarcus Ware, but he was still a great leader. I mean, I put those moves up there in the top 5 moves that Elway's ever made, mostly just because of leadership. I
Right.
mean, they changed the entire culture of the locker room and the entire team. So, I mean, those are important things to keep in mind. But again, I mean, bringing in Joe Flacco, it's the right move. It's not anything to get excited about. It doesn't really alter too much of how I view the Broncos, but it does alter it enough to make me go, okay, this makes sense.
Right. And I think for me, the way that I was talking with Sayer on the last show that I did, there's the way that I defined it. It's like there's this quiet optimism, or the saying where I say that they're going to challenge for the playoffs next year. I think so. I mean, if you look at it based on the last previous history with the Baltimore Ravens, honestly, Joe Flacco might actually have a better set of weapons here in Denver than he ever had in Baltimore, save for that one season when they did go to the Super Bowl. I mean, they do have a running game. The Broncos do have a running game. They actually have two dynamic running backs. They have a wide receiver that fits, in essence, what Joe Flacco wants to do. They don't really have to go after a wide receiver. It just all depends on what they do with Emmanuel Sanders. Do they want to move on from Emmanuel Sanders? I don't know, but if they do, then yes, you want to start looking at some other guys that are, going to fit that particular mold. But I mean, Emmanuel Sanders is still a tough guy to lose if they were to move on from him. But you got Emmanuel Sanders, you have Deshaun Hamilton, and you have, a guy in the sneaky place of, Deshaun Hamilton and Tim Patrick, who came up big. So, and then you get some more of the unpredictable side to where we saw how reliable Jake Butt was in the first handful of weeks of the season, to where he really showed up, honestly, right out of the gate as being Mr. Reliable with Case Keenum. So I think that the tight end group is probably the one missing link, probably, of that entire offensive weaponry. But I mean, Joe Flacco, I would say, is coming into this situation quite happy, knowing the fact that he does have some pretty darn good weapons at his disposal.
And I would add this, looking at the other side of the ball, especially now that you've added Vic Fangio, one of the best defensive coordinators in all of football, that defense should be a top 10 unit this next year. I mean, they're missing some pieces. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit. But I mean, when Joe Flacco doesn't have the entire team on his shoulders and saying, dude, you got to go out there and just win these games for us, he's a pretty good quarterback. I mean, he's like, again, he's not outstanding to the point that you're sitting here saying we just got ourselves a top 10 quarterback, but he's a guy that knows his role. He knows what he's good at, what he's not good at, and can go do enough to win games. Again, he's going to win a lot of close games. You look at his records. I mean, the beginning of his career was pretty good just because he had a lot more pieces around him because he was on a cheap contract. But most years, he at least made them an 8-8 team. At least 10-6, 8-8, and that's kind of where I see the Broncos for this next year, somewhere between 8-8, 10-6, depending on what they do in free agency, if they get some luck on injuries and things like that. And so, I mean, I do think that Flacco improves your team that much, that he's at least 2 or 3 wins better than Case Keenum.
Yeah. One of the things that I did not know, and it's funny you were talking about that, I did not know that there is a WAR stat in football. I mean, I knew there was a WAR stat in baseball, obviously wins above replacement, but I didn't know there was a wins above replacement in football. And and it's funny we're talking about, him adding wins to the team. They did one. Pro Football Focus did one. I believe it was about a week ago or so, where they said like the wins above replacement or WAR for Case Keenum was like 0.3 or something like that, and Joe Flacco was 1.2, which fits sort of exactly what you were saying. I mean, you're in that 8-8, 9-7, maybe if you're lucky, the 10-6 area. But the one thing that I think that I've always been impressed with in Joe Flacco is sort of what we see in Eli Manning, to a certain extent. when they get comfortable and when they are in rhythm, and then when they are able to strike while the iron is hot, there might not be a more, as they say in NBA Jam, like he's heating up. There might be a better, there might not be a better quarterback when they are all heating up at the right time in Joe Flacco.
Yeah, when he's comfortable, when he has a good offensive line in front of him that keeps him clean, he does pretty good. He has some good moments. I mean, you look at that 2014 season, they had a good offensive line, they had a running game, and he, again, he didn't have everything on his shoulders. He had some time to sit back there in the pocket if he needed to. Only got sacked 19 times that season. I mean, he just, like I said, he got comfortable. And all of a sudden, he had 27 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. They were a very dynamic team. They were so close to beating the Patriots, should have beat the Patriots, if we're being really honest, in the playoffs. And I mean, and that same kind of system, I mean, some very big time similarities because Kubiak was the coach then. And now we have Scangarello, who runs not the same system, but some similarities. And so this should be a very comfortable setting for Joe Flacco. And then you get in Munchak to rebuild that offensive line. I think they're going to add a couple pieces in free agency and maybe one in the draft, and we'll kind of see how that works. But I think that they'll have a much better offensive line, which will make the running game that much more dynamic. Joe Flacco's ability to push the ball down the field and throw to every square inch of the field will keep defenses backed off, making boxes easier for the running backs to run behind. I mean, there's just a lot of things, again, that Flacco brings to the table that Case Keenum didn't. I didn't mind Case Keenum. I thought he was going to be I didn't think he was going to have his Minnesota kind of season. I thought he'd do better than he did. But you saw the limitations. You saw when we got down into the red zone and he tried to hit those seam routes. He didn't have the zip to make those throws. He got picked off about 3 or 4 times just on that play alone in the red zone. And you saw other times where, again, especially red zone, when things tightened up, he just didn't trust his arm to do things that Joe Flacco will trust his arm to do. And that makes your offense that much more dynamic when you're coming away with 7 points instead of 3 or 0 because of a turnover. And so I don't know. I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic. It's not like I'm sitting here saying that they're Super Bowl contenders or anything like that because of this move, but it at least makes them a very competitive team.
Right. It's like what I said. It's like a quiet optimism, or just, or you, as you put it, cautiously optimistic. It's just this. It's one of those to where I'm comfortable to where I was a week ago, which is sort of like why I wrote the reflecting back on the Joe Flacco thing, because obviously when it happened, I mean, the whole Broncos country and everything around it was just like, what just happened? Like, really, what just, like, they're all trying to wrap their head around it. And I think letting it stew and just letting it sit there, it made all the sense in the world. So then let's go into free agency, because you said it, that there's a possibility. You've been told that Joe Flacco and the Broncos are talking about reworking a contract.
Mm-hmm.
See, the one thing that's really cool about Joe Flacco is he seems like, we say it all the time, he's a quiet leader. I think Joe Flacco is a quiet yet fiery competitor in the locker room. And also, I think he is going to be that type of guy that wants to help his team win. And what I mean by that is, I would not be surprised if they did come to terms on a restructure or some sort of pay cut that will allow them. Now, I don't know as far as wiggle room, what have you, or anything like that, to where you will see, but there will be some significant gap in there to where I think that there will be enough wiggle room where the Broncos can make a slew of moves. Now, obviously, the news broke today from Benjamin Albright that the Broncos may be interested in, or at least are looking to be interested in, Jonathan Hankins, who, by the way, I didn't realize he was 26 years old still, or just around that young age of 26.
Yeah.
So to me, I feel like, I mean, they did this with Case Keenum, rather, and they really weren't all that aggressive. But it feels like for me that when they made this move, they wanted to make it now, and that obviously with the amount of suitors that there were at the disposal with Joe Flacco. I mean, we're not talking about Joe Flacco, but I mean, in essence, when they made that move, to me, it's sort of signaled to the point that they wanted to be really, really aggressive for either their guy or a plethora of guys coming up in free agency.
Yeah, I mean, Elway's always been the type that he's not going to mess around. He's not going to play some of these games that other teams are willing to play. And so if he wants a guy, he's just going to be aggressive and go get his guy. I mean, that's just how he's always worked. And I mean, I guess that maybe that's a fault at times too, because there's times where he locks on to somebody too much. And I mean, we saw it with Paxton Lynch. We saw it with Garrett Bowles. And I'm not saying that the Garrett Bowles pick was the wrong one, but again, I mean, it was known months. Yeah. It was known months in advance that he was going to go get that guy. Yeah. And I mean, we're kind of hearing the same thing with Drew Lock now. I like Lock a lot more than some of the other guys that have messed up in the past for the Broncos. But
this is true.
But no, I mean, I think that this is going to be an offseason where they're pretty aggressive. I think that Joe Flacco, he's not the long-term solution. Obviously, he's 34, 35.
Yeah. I mean, he's in his mid-30s, but he's also not. Well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, they acquired Manning around that age, but then again, I mean, Manning is not Joe Flacco, and Flacco is not Peyton Manning.
Right. But even there, I mean, at most, the great thing about this deal is it's a year-to-year deal. They can cut him at any time without any kind of repercussions cap-wise. And so that's nice for the Broncos. So say they do go draft Drew Lock, because I mean, I'm not going to keep sugarcoating. It's Drew Lock that they want. And let's say after this season, they decide Drew Lock is ready to be our guy, kind of like what the Chiefs did with Alex Smith.
Yeah.
I mean, best case scenario for the Broncos is Joe Flacco goes out and has a pretty good year. And then they look at Drew Lock during the offseason and say, we can't keep this guy on the bench. And maybe they go trade Joe Flacco back for another 4th-round pick.
Mm-hmm.
And, something like that. I don't know exactly, but that would be best case scenario. But I do think the Broncos plan on being able to build a roster to have a young guy be able to take over and have a lot of pieces around him that make his life easy. I could see having the offensive line. I mean, if we want to start talking about free agents here, guys I know the Broncos are very, very high on. And this isn't some kind of secret or anything like that on many of these guys. Billy Turner, they want to re-sign him. Mm-hmm. They like his versatility to play guard, play tackle, whatever they need him to do. And he's only 27, so they see better years ahead, especially now that they brought in Munchak. So they're getting aggressive, trying to get that deal done as soon as possible. The main guy for the offensive line that they want to get, Juwan James. Elway has tried to trade for this guy for the past 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense. The guy's about to hit free agency. What's Elway going to do? He's going to go get his right tackle.
And oh, by the way, and under the radar type of scenario with Juwan James, isn't there a certain former Denver Bronco that was also on the Miami Dolphins staff? What was his name? He was one of the most durable guards. Yeah, Chris Cooper.
Chris Cooper. Yep. So again, that just you make all those connections and you say you don't even need insider information to know the Broncos are going to go after Juwan James.
Right.
And I think there's mutual interest on both sides from what I've been told. Other guys that you can draw connections to, Ramon Foster from Pittsburgh. He's a little bit older. He's 33, but you can obviously make those kind of connections.
Yeah.
I mean, Jared Veldheer, I think he's more of a backup option. If, say, they don't get Juwan James, then maybe let's bring back Jared Veldheer kind of thing. I mean, that makes some sense for the Broncos. I'm trying to think of some other names, at least for the offensive line, that make a lot of sense.
Yeah. I mean, they brought back Cyrus Kouandjio for, and we liked Cyrus when he was in the preseason. But I mean, Trent Brown would be another one. But I mean, still, I mean, between Trent Brown and Juwan James, I mean, that's a pretty penny on that tackle market. So my guess is it would be, who do you want to price out more, and who do you value more?
Yeah, I really do think it's going to be Juwan James that they're going to go after first. Trenton Brown, I mean, I think he's a really, really good player, but I'm not sure that he's going to be a great fit for the Broncos and what they want to do, because they want to play that zone scheme with power mixed in, and he's a pure power guy. So I don't know if he's the best fit, but hey, I mean, if they don't get James, I mean, it makes sense to go after the number 2 guy that's going to hit the market. And I mean, I guess some would argue that he's the number 1 guy in the market. But again, I do think that there's some guys out there that they're going to really like, that they're going to be very aggressive to fix this offensive line and give some nice pieces for Munchak to work with and put together a good offensive line. I don't think Matt Paradis is going to be back. I know there's going to be a lot of Bronco fans really scratching their head on that one. And I understand. It's kind of a combination of 2 things. One, the center position, the contracts have honestly just gotten a little out of control.
They really have. Even the franchise tag.
Yeah. I mean, what is 15 million, 14 million, something like that?
Yeah.
And Paradis is a good player, but I don't think he's elite for his position. And from what I understand, the Broncos and him are very, very far apart. Paradis is upset about the contract offers the Broncos have made towards him. And the other part of it is the Broncos have a guy by the name Sam Jones. Is that right? That they drafted last year.
Aquaman.
And they really, really like him. I think that's kind of one of the pieces that people are missing, that they have a guy in mind that they're sitting here saying, I think this could be that next Matt Paradis that was on the practice squad for a year and then became a great starter.
Well, and even 2, I mean, we also have to factor in, and you and I have talked about this too before, Connor McGovern also might even make a pretty darn good center to a certain extent. And if we think back to the regular season, when they actually needed it the most, when Matt Paradis went down, Connor McGovern came in and stepped in and did quite well. Now, obviously, it reared its ugly head at the tail end of the season. But, I mean, for that stretch of games where they needed it, I mean, Connor McGovern looked pretty darn good.
Yeah, the only thing that was missing there with Connor McGovern, he's a very talented player. I'd say he's actually probably more talented than Matt Paradis. Matt Paradis he's one of the smartest centers in the NFL. And his ability to communicate with the rest of the offensive line, it was easy to see. What teams figured out was run stunts at this offensive line. They have all these mix and match pieces together that have never worked together. Just run stunts at them and they will get confused. And that's exactly what happened. And so, I mean, it makes sense that they need, I mean, and I think Connor McGovern, if he had a full off season to work on communicating and building relationships with all the guys around him, I think he'd do just fine. The big piece that I really don't know what's going to happen is Ronald Leary. I mean,
that's the wild card.
I really like Leary when he's healthy, but can you trust the guy to stay healthy for an entire season? And especially at his cost.
Will he be healthy enough to be playing in 2019? Because obviously he's going to be on the roster. But I mean, the question is just going to become, will he be on the roster in 2020? I mean, that's, I guess, the ultimate $1 million question with Ronald Leary. So I was looking at the right tackle market on Spot Track. There is Juwan James. There's Brent Quayle, Ladrian Waddle from New England, Marshall Newhouse, Austin Howard, Andre Smith, who's old, Joe Barksdale, the I give up sacks a lot, Eric Flowers. I didn't realize he's only 25 years old, but I mean, so TJ Clemmings from Oakland down for the right tackle. So
yeah, I think a couple guys to keep an eye on is what does Pittsburgh do with Marcus Gilbert? I've heard some rumors that they've thought about letting him walk. And so it wouldn't surprise me if he hit the market, if the Broncos would really get crazy going after him, because I know Munchak is a really big fan of his.
But again,
And
again, you don't have to be an insider to understand
where,
familiarity with
right, the connections that come there. And so there's just going to be, that's I think the question that I have the most is who's going to be cut. Yeah. Because I think there's going to be a few more players added to this list that'll make things a little bit easier for the Broncos, where maybe it's not as big of a bidding war to get guys. And it helps also that this is a very deep tackle class in this draft. So if teams sit there and say, well, we didn't get our guy in free agency, we'll just go to the draft. There's other options, where a couple years ago when the Broncos drafted Bowles, there was 3 guys. And then everybody after that, you're sitting there saying, this guy is terrible. Mm-hmm. It was such a bad tackle draft. And so, I mean, you saw other guys getting overpaid in free agency because teams are like, we can't get anything in the draft.
Yeah, I've been sort of pondering that because, in all honesty, the free agency class is deep. I mean, it's probably one of the reasons why the Broncos went out and got Joe Flacco, because the quarterback market, I mean, of all the positions in free agency, the quarterback market might be the most empty. And because everything else, I mean, maybe for a tight end but I would say tight end is probably a little bit better. But I mean, the tackle market, the defensive line market, the cornerback market, I mean, the free agency class, I mean, it is quite deep, and obviously the linebacker market. So then, the one of the things that I've been struggling with is obviously Jeff Hireman is a free agent. He played obviously a lot better to the expectations of probably you and I thought in a contract year, and obviously it was a contract year. But how much, and this isn't really a Jeff Hireman question, but how much of, say, a tight end class that maybe is a little bit better than the one that was 2017 with Evan Ingram and OJ Howard and Adam Shaheen and Bucky Hodges and a bunch of other ones that were like, there was probably a lot of really good tight ends, but there wasn't really, say, a lot of depth after that. But versus, say, this one, there's just a lot of like really good tight ends that just from front to bottom, you can pick the anybody and you'll have a pretty darn good tight end given development and what have you. So how much will that slow, say, the free agent market for a tight end? And knowing Elway and how he always prides himself on best player available from free agency into the draft.
I mean, it's going to lower the market. It's kind of like running back, where some of these guys are wanting big money, and then teams are going, well, I look at the draft and I say I can get a guy for 1/10 of the cost that gives me 90% of what you bring to the table. So why would I overpay for you? And it's kind of the same with this tight end group of, why am I going to overpay for you when I can go get a guy that brings me at least 90%, if not even more than what you bring? Yeah. I do think with the Broncos, they're going to bring in at least one free agent and then also one from the draft. And I mean, so there's some guys that make sense. I know, like Tyler Eifert, he's a guy that's been hurt a lot.
He's sneaky. I tweeted it yesterday. He's a sneaky option for me. I know that he's been hurt, but I mean, I don't want to poo-poo it, but I mean, him being paired with Lauren Landau, who's one of the better athletic trainers in the business, I mean, you pair him with that, I think the opportunity would be there for Eifert to get back to where he was. And obviously, the Chicago tight end that just was recently released. So, I think there's a lot of, I think, as far as tight ends, there's some decent tight ends out there that honestly could help a football team between youth and veterans.
Right. I mean, I look at Max Williams. He played with Joe Flacco. He's another one. He's only 25, hitting the market. Mercedes Lewis. I mean, he's up there in age. Obviously, he's 35.
Austin Severian Jenkins. I mean,
yeah, there's another.
But it's interesting though, and the thing about Eifert though that is so interesting there, Carl, it's weird. There isn't a rapport with Joe Flacco, but there is a rapport with Joe Flacco because it's in division.
Yeah.
Like, so I mean, so again, I wouldn't be surprised if they went and got a guy like, say, a Benjamin Watson, even though he's retiring. But I mean, it wouldn't. I would not be in the least bit surprised if they went and got a guy like, say, a Tyler Eifert or Max Williams. Which, I mean, again, you don't have to be an insider per se to connect those types of dots. But Tyler Eifert, I guess, would be the interesting one because there isn't a connection, but at the same time, there is a connection because they saw each other so many times.
Right. Yeah, he's one that makes a lot of sense. Just in, I don't think he's going to get a lot of guaranteed money. I think he's going to have a very incentive-driven kind of contract, and I think that's something that Elway would really like to have because, again, it's one of those very big time. I mean, he's only 28, so this guy, if he can get healthy and stay healthy, I mean, yeah, that's a big if. I mean, that's why you make it a very incentive-driven kind of contract. It'd be the same with Jeff Hireman too for me. I mean, Hireman had flashes this last year, but he once again ended up injured. I mean, how many times can this guy get injured and you keep giving him chances? And so, but again, there's you still see talent. So again, I wouldn't mind him. I wouldn't be jumping out of my chair saying, "Oh my gosh, we just got a great tight end" or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it'd still be one of those, maybe this guy could actually bring in 500 yards, 10 touchdowns.
Which is saying something still.
Broncos. And which, I mean, would still be the best tight end production the Broncos have had since Julius Thomas anyway.
Or even Owen Daniels and Joel Dreesen for that matter. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And like I said, you still go to the draft looking for a tight end because it's not a fixed position. And you can't trust Jake Butt. The other guys are not really anything to write home about. And so the stronger you can make that group, because one thing that Joe Flacco brings to the table that Case Keenum never did was his ability to throw over the middle of the field. Well, who's over the middle of the field? Tight ends.
Yeah.
So you got to get him a weapon there. You look at this past year with the Ravens. They finally found a tight end, Mark Andrews. That was a receiving option.
You love some Mark Andrews too.
I did. And you saw why, because he had all these long touchdowns. This guy was just tearing it up. And I'm sitting there going, yep, that's what I wanted.
Yeah, pretty much.
And so, I think you got to go both ways here. I think you spend a little bit, but you don't have to go crazy because I don't think any of these tight ends are going to cost a ton of money. I really don't. I don't see anybody that's jumping out at me saying, oh my gosh, get this guy paid.
Right. So it's kind of like that weird thing where I'm looking at it like it's a pretty darn good tight end market, all things considered. But there isn't really a guy that I'm going to just blow the doors off and sign a guy to 3 years, $30 million. I mean, they're just not that type of guy.
Right.
I mean, Eifert could theoretically be that guy if he didn't have those ACL tears and just the numerous amount of injuries. So then where do you prioritize then? If you're going into free agency, where do you prioritize? Is it linebacker? Is it corner? Is it that right tackle position? I mean, see, that to me is just interesting because if you look at it, obviously there's the guys with linebacker like, say, Quan Alexander and CJ Mosley obviously has been talked about, and obviously there's some quiet buzz maybe that's out there that says that CJ Mosley and Baltimore are looking at coming to terms on a contract. But I mean, I don't know. It's just, for me, it's just the linebacker position is just kind of that interesting one to where you have guys like Quan Alexander too that is honestly, I would actually say I am quite impressed with more the linebacker market probably of all the other positions, because if you don't want one, you can go out and still sign, say, a surprising guy that may not have been on, for example, and I'll stump for a guy like this. Will Compton. I mean, if you go back and you look at it, He was, some might say, I mean, he was a captain of the Washington Redskins defense. He played with the Tennessee Titans. He's lasted, in my honest opinion, he's lasted a lot longer in the NFL than I ever thought he would coming out of Nebraska. So he's paid his due, should I say? But then
Yeah.
you obviously, but then you go and you look at, say, like a guy like a Preston Brown who's 26, Deion Buchanan who is 27, who, in all honesty, would be, if we were to do a comparison, would maybe be like the Mark Barron of the Vic Fangio defense. Which, I mean, you could theoretically look at, say, a Jamal Carter in that regard too, which I don't think Jamal Carter gets talked enough with the Vic Fangio fit in that scheme. But
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was just gonna say that the inside linebacker, just to me, is, I think, very, very deep. That if, say, they missed out on a CJ Mosley or a Quan Alexander, they can go out and get someone.
Yeah, it's probably the main position that I sit here and say Broncos have to be willing to spend some money, just because it's such a change in defensive mindset. When you had Wade Phillips, who was very much defensive line and cornerbacks, that was the focus. Where now with Vic Fangio, it's those off-ball linebackers and safeties. And so when you have to have that kind of focus, and right now, I mean, Brandon Marshall's going to be gone. And so you got Todd Davis, who I think he's one of the more underrated players on the Broncos. He's improved every year. He's very, very good against the run. I think he's improved against the pass. But again, he's a limited athlete. So he doesn't fit very well with what Fangio's going to ask of that position. You got your boy from Iowa, Josie Jewell, and he's a decent player. He's got great instincts, but again, limited athletically. And you look at what the Bears had last year. Roquan Smith, one of the most athletic linebackers day one that he entered the NFL. Danny Trevathan. Broncos missed that guy. He is the one guy that I always say Broncos messed up not signing him. I like Brandon Marshall, and I think they thought, okay, there's better years ahead for Brandon Marshall. He doesn't have some of the injury concerns that Trevathan has. But we've seen them take two very opposite directions in their careers. And to me, Trevathan was the heart of that Broncos defense. But again, you need somebody that's going to be athletic for the Broncos. So KJ Wright, he's a little bit up there in age, but he is an athletic freak for Seattle all those years and that great defense. I could see the Broncos going after him to become really that leader in the middle of the defense. You've already mentioned a couple of them that definitely makes sense. CJ Mosley, I doubt that he gets to free agency, but right. We'll see. Yeah. You never know. I mean, we've seen other players decide last second to pull out and decide they want to see what their value is. If he hits the market, Broncos are going to go crazy for him. I can promise you that. And of course, I do think Quan Alexander is maybe now the target for the Broncos. He's
a freak.
He makes a ton of sense. He's only 25. I think the Broncos will be very aggressive getting him. And like you said, there's some nice pieces. The draft isn't as loaded this year for that off-ball linebacker position,
except for say first-round talents. But that's usually just Devin White and then the others.
Yeah, and the others, they would be borderline first-round picks.
Right.
There's things in their game that you sit there and say, I'm not a big fan of that. So I think free agency is the direction that they go to fix that position. I think the strong safety position, because I don't think Darian Stewart's going to be with the Broncos much longer. He's lost it. There's rumors that he's going to retire this offseason anyway. And Simmons is a much better free safety than he is a strong safety anyway. So you move him to his natural position. You got a couple strong safeties that the Broncos could be willing to spend some pretty good money at. Of course, Adrian Amos, who was with Vic Fangio there in Chicago, was one of the top 10 safeties easily in the NFL this past season. Landon Collins, when he's healthy, he's a top 10 safety in the league. I think Amos is a better fit, obviously. I mean, he worked perfect in Fangio's system, plus there's no have to learn a whole new playbook or anything like that. He just comes in and is one of the leaders of that defense day one. And so those are the positions. I think you spend money in free agency on the defense because it's easy to sell defensive players to come work with Fangio. Plus, you got Von Miller, Bradley Chubb. You got some pieces on that defense that you can sit there and say, hey, we're building something special. Come join us.
And even the offensive line too. I mean, and there it comes back to Mike Munchak and Vic Fangio. Which, I mean, if those are your big pieces of the staff, so to speak, I mean, heck, I would be doing a lot of recruiting for potential free agents to say that, hey, our biggest strong suit of having arguably the best defensive coach in the last 30 years that is comparable to Wade Phillips, maybe even better, we can make you better. Go back and look at his Pro Bowl record of the players that he's turned into Pro Bowls. Vic Fangio, it's quite impressive. And then you go and you look at Mike Munchak, Hall of Fame player, maybe one of the best offensive coaches in the game, if not the best. And obviously, we all know where he stands as an offensive line coach. So that recruiting is going to help. One of the safety names that honestly it's kind of more of a fascinating one. How would you feel about Kenny Vaccaro, Carl?
Oh, it wouldn't be an exciting move for me. I guess I would say it's okay.
Yeah.
When I'm looking at guys like Landon Collins or Adrian Amos, and I'm sitting there saying these are Pro Bowl type talents getting ready. They're in their prime. And those are the guys I'm like, man, just add that to this defense and it gives them a whole new level of what they can do. And so Vaccaro, I've liked him, some of the things that he's done, but he's just never quite lived up to the hype. So it's not been one of my favorites.
Yeah.
I did want to hit you talked about Vic Fangio and his selling points. I think he could go to a guy like Juan Alexander and say, I am the greatest linebacker coach of all time. He's had his players make the Pro Bowl 36 times, first team All-Pro awards 23 times. He can sit there and say, I've had guys like Mills, Jackson, Green, Lewis, Suggs, Willis, Mack. I mean, he's got a long list of guys that he can sit there and say, look what I've done with these guys. I took them to new levels. I think Mack was already great anyway, obviously. But again, it just shows what this guy brings to the table. And so a guy like Juan Alexander can sit there and say, hey, maybe you can help me to become that Hall of Fame kind of guy. And maybe that helps them to not have to overpay for certain positions, even though they're not in that position of saying, hey, we're that Super Bowl contender right now. But you can sit there and say, we're building something special. We're going to have a very special defense. I mean, look what we've already got. We got the best pass rusher in football. We got the best pass rushing rookie in football. We've got one of the best cornerbacks already in play. We bring you in. We bring in another cornerback. We bring in a safety. We think we've got something here. And so, again, that's why I'm spending on the defense, because I think you can get market level deals. I don't think you have to go out and overspend as much. Offensively, every player is going to be looking at this team and going, you're not there.
I mean, really, I mean, that's why it's kind of interesting, because really where the Broncos might actually go and spend hay is the offensive line because of the recruiting pitches with Mike Munchak and Vic Fangio. And so that's why it makes a ton of sense to just go out there and at least talk to Trent Brown's reps or Juwan James's reps, and which, by the way, I would love to be a fly on the wall for the Juwan James conversation. Which, can you imagine just how long? I would imagine just how long of a conversation something like that would be, knowing the fact that the relationships theoretically have already been built.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, like, hey, Juwan, you want to come to the Broncos? Sure. I mean, there's mutual interest. Hey, by the way, hey, Chris, you want to come say hi?
Yeah. I mean, that one should be just a, what do you want to be paid?
Right.
He doesn't have to come see the facilities or much like that. He can just sit there and say, okay, I know what you guys have. I know who you are. I know what I'm getting myself into.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, it's nice that way. Same with Adrian Amos. I could see him being the very first signing the Broncos make if he makes it to free agency. I heard that he's talking to Chicago right now, but
he also did come out, was it this week? And he said that he wouldn't obviously see Denver as a destination. I mean, is that what he said? From what I've heard, is that he did, or someone was asking about Denver, and he said, obviously, I can see Denver as a destination.
Right. I mean, that's the easiest connection of any player this offseason. It just makes too much sense for him to be a Bronco. If Chicago can't get him signed, he will be a Bronco, in my opinion. It just there's no better fit for what the Broncos want or need on that defensive side of the ball. And so it's nice that way that the Broncos have that easy selling point to one of the best free agents that's going to hit the market this offseason. And I mean, they've got a few nice pieces to market. That's something I guess we can't have said over the last couple of years. I mean, when you look at our coach, nothing against our guy for the last couple of years, but he wasn't a great selling point. Oh, we want you to come here. Well, okay, you don't have a great coaching staff. Your team's kind of in chaos. You don't have an owner right now, per se. I mean, there's just a lot of things that were chaotic, and I think that's one of the really good things about hiring Vic Fangio is it's kind of that calming voice.
Yeah, death by inches.
Right, and it was kind of like when John Fox came into the place. Broncos were in utter chaos. John Fox was the right coach for what that team was when he first came in. And now the rebuilding process got amped up when Peyton Manning came in the building. But for actually rebuilding a team and rebuilding a locker room and a reputation, all those kind of things, John Fox was good at that. He's an easygoing guy. He's a guy that players can look at and say, you've been in the league a long time. You know what you're talking about. And it's the same with Fangio. Players know this guy's been around for a long time, and they can easily go talk to other players around the league and say, how is this guy? And they're going to say, I'm running through a wall for him. So it's nice that way.
One of the positions we had yet to touch on is corner. And I was just kind of perusing through the cornerback position, and it isn't quite like the inside linebacker, should I say, where it isn't deep.
No.
But there's well more of riches as far as youth and more veteran guys. So who are some guys that you could potentially see on the Broncos radar? I mean, obviously you look at, say, a guy like a Ronald Darby. I mean, there's probably only one of the bigger names that stands out. I mean, Bryce Callahan, obviously, with the days of Chicago. Darqueze Dennard could be an interesting one. EJ Gaines, maybe. Ken Crawley, I guess, would be a very interesting one with him being New Orleans and a former CU Buffalo.
Yeah, I mean, I guess here's the nice thing. Again, with Fangio, you're looking at different cornerbacks than what the Broncos have had in the past. You don't need quite as much talent. You just need guys that are really, really intelligent at the position. And so, I mean, it makes things a little bit easier of what they're trying to look for. But it's still, I could see like a guy like Jason McCourty, because the Broncos run a very similar system to what the Patriots have run. They want to have a little bit more zone, but guys that can still play man coverage. He can go a little bit of both ways. I'd say Jason Verrett, but I don't think the Broncos want two small corners on the field. That's why, again,
and also the injury scare. I mean,
well, yeah, I mean that plays into it. Pierre Desir is another one that I really think would fit well with the Broncos of the Colts. I think he had a great season this last year. And I think he set himself up for a nice contract. Like you said, Ronald Darby is one that makes a ton of sense for the Broncos. I think he fits their system very well. Beyond that, I don't think, unfortunately, you can't fix the entire team in one offseason.
No.
And I think cornerback is one of those positions where the Broncos might just have to go cheap and just kind of say, we're going to fix it next year.
Or just go to the draft. I mean,
well, yeah, I mean,
yeah.
But even the draft, I'm sitting here saying there's good corners, but there's no elite corners. I know some will point to Greedy Williams, but he has some major work ethic questions, attitude questions. Do you really want that coming to the Broncos? I mean, they just kind of had some issues with Bradley Roby being that same kind of guy.
I'd probably be looking more at Byron Murphy than I would be Greedy Williams.
Right. I do know they like the corner from Baker from Georgia. They think he is an absolute perfect fit for what they want to do on defense. But at pick number 10, that might be a reach. And so if let's say Drew Lock gets taken before the Broncos pick at 10, and let's say that they can actually trade back to 15, 16, something like that, I could see Baker being the pick there. Because, again, he is the absolute perfect fit for what the Broncos want to do on defense. He's smart. He's aggressive. He is tough. He is a hard worker. He is consistent. I don't think he's given up a touchdown since 2016. I mean, that's pretty impressive for a college quarterback.
I saw that tweet from, was it Jason Reed or, yeah, it was Reed who tweeted that out. He said that was quite a fascinating stat that Baker did not allow a touchdown since 2016. That is just, you just think of all those just shutdown corners.
Right.
Not giving up a touchdown in 2 years or 3 years. 3 years.
Right. And he's willing to help in the run game quite a bit. He's the guy that's not going to be he's not going to be a top 5 cornerback, I don't think, in the NFL, but he's always going to be that very, very consistent top 20 kind of guy. And I think he's going to be ready day one to come in, be a starter for the Broncos. And again, that's just if they miss out on Drew Lock, right. Cornerback is a position that I could see them going after because there are 3 guys there in the first round that are very intriguing. And I think they like Devin White as well. But again, I think they view him, somebody put it this way, they view him in that DJ Williams light, that he's more athlete than football player.
Yeah.
And there's just too many times on film that you see this guy is guessing where the football's going and he guesses wrong.
I've kind of noticed that in the times that I've seen.
And so I think with him, there's a little bit of, you have to kind of go, okay, can Vic Fangio turn this guy into a star? And well, I think he can. I just don't know if he has that right makeup mentally to be that star linebacker that you're really, really hoping for. I like the guy. I'm just not absolutely in love with him. And so there's a lot of different directions the Broncos can go for sure. I think if they don't go quarterback in the first round, they're going to go defense in the first round. I do think that.
Yeah. It's just all going to, it's just all going to, I think, pinpoint to if the Broncos say they just, I'm not going to say 2014 aggressive, but I mean, if they come out aggressive and they attack the needs and they sign players that are ultimately going to play a large part in their football team, then everything is on the table for best player available at that point, which I mean has been the MO of John Elway coming into the draft.
Yeah.
If they can hit on just about every single need of what they feel is the best need for the football team, then 100% the Broncos will be going best player available yet again at pick number 10, which means that quarterback will be on the table still. Now, do I think, in my opinion, do I think that it's probably a little bit more likely that they attack, say, a guy like more of those mid to late round guys, say like a day 2 and day 3 guys when they acquired Flacco? I would say yes, but it's like what I tweeted out yesterday. I would not be surprised if they did take, say, a quarterback in the first with their first pick, just because of the amount of homework and everything that they've done with the college concepts. And as we all learned, the Broncos spent a lot of time. It wasn't just Drew Lock they really spent. Well, I mean, it might have been, knowing the fact that they're probably still drooling over Drew Lock, but they've spent a lot of time with college quarterbacks. So why not just grab one still? So whether it is the first round or whether it is the second, third, fourth, fifth, what have you, I still see the Broncos grabbing a guy like that. Now, one of the guys, and Carl, you've talked about it at length with me, and as the listeners are listening in, one of the guys that I've actually have really come to like, and that I thought is going to be a pretty seamless backup with Joe Flacco, and at least learn the system and have the opportunity to be a really good quarterback. Say if Flacco steps down, and if they didn't get a guy like a Drew Lock, how would you feel if say a guy like a Brett Ripien?
Oh, I mean, I like him. I don't see a guy that's going to be anything special. But let's say that second, third round, and you haven't got your quarterback. Probably of that second tier guys in this draft, he's probably my favorite. He's got decent arm talent. He showed improvement throughout his college career. He seems like a pretty smart guy. I haven't done as much on him as I have, obviously, the first round guys. But I think, again, the Broncos probably really like him and what he brings to the table. And so it really wouldn't shock me if they miss out on quarterback, that he's their second or third round pick at the position. And they feel pretty good about it. I see it kind of in the, maybe what the Cowboys have had, where they have a decent quarterback, nothing like absolutely special, but you have enough and they're cheap enough that you can build a really, really good team around them to take pretty much all the pressure off the quarterback. It's even when Joe Flacco came into the league. That's what made the Ravens so good, was they had a quarterback that didn't cost them games, which I think Ripien can do. He had a couple games that you're just sitting there going, what in the world are you doing?
Yeah.
But otherwise, he didn't cost his team a ton of games. But I mean, you can build enough pieces around him. You can build a really strong run game. You can build a really strong, obviously, offensive line. You can get a couple pieces around him. I mean, there's enough there that you're sitting there saying, okay, this could be good. This could be enough for the next few years to give us a maybe 3-year window at the Super Bowl. The only thing I hate about those kind of things is kind of like what happened with Joe Flacco. Let's say you do go win a Super Bowl with a guy because he's so cheap and you can surround him with talent. Well, then as a team, you kind of feel pressured that you got to go spend money on that guy, and you try to make them something that they're not. You try to say, you got to become a franchise quarterback now. And Joe Flacco showed that doesn't really work out well. There's a lot of guys. Matthew Stafford, he's a good quarterback, but he's not top tier quarterback.
Right.
And he keeps getting paid because teams sit there and say, we don't want to go to the bottom of the barrel because we have a guy that keeps us in games and does just enough to make us think maybe one season he could get us over the hump. And it just doesn't happen. So, I mean, there's some of that. That's a little bit why I like the first round quarterback, because at least you get that extra season.
Right. It goes back to that Kansas City model, because and again, there's just a lot on the table, I feel, for the Denver Broncos, and just a lot to talk about, because they just saw the Kansas City Chiefs go toe to toe in the AFC Championship game with maybe the greatest quarterback of all time in Tom Brady. And if you're looking at a potential model and that's in division, why not try and I'm not saying try and make it a gadget offense, but try and at least maybe build off of that from the quarterback perspective. Because you, me, and Nick and Sayer, and we say it until the dogs come home. If you have a player in mind, and it doesn't matter if it's a quarterback, if it's a running back, if it's just any of those players, just if you have a guy in mind, in particular a quarterback, if you have a guy in mind, go get him. Just go get him.
Yep.
And so if the Broncos have spent endless amounts of hours and energy and homework going to 4 or 5 games plus the Senior Bowl and what have you to go see Drew Lock, do everything in your power to get Drew Lock. I really like Drew Lock, and I also really like Kyler Murray. I mean, I think that Kyler Murray is way more explosive when he has the ball in his hands as a runner and at times even as a passer, just because of what he makes, just throws that you're just like, dude, you really should go to baseball. I mean, he has that legitimate baseball arm of a deep pass and just, I mean, there's a lot of flaws in his game still, and just as far as, him, the body type and height is still a question because teams always around the NFL will question the height and everything. But honestly, I would not be surprised if, say a team does take a chance on him and rolls the dice and, has that opportunity there. I would not be surprised if Murray turns out a little bit of a better career than Drew Lock. It all just depends on how that particular team views him. Do they build enough pieces around him? I mean, I would not be surprised. And the interesting thing for me, though, about the whole Drew Lock thing and Kyler Murray thing, in all honesty, John Elway could relate to both quarterbacks. I mean, you have a quarterback and you have Drew Lock that, as you alluded to earlier, he is probably the most, I guess, suitable trait-wise under Joe Flacco. But then you have this Kyler Murray dynamic where he's trying and still probably fighting this issue of should I play baseball or not. Well, there's really only one executive in the need for a quarterback that can 100% relate to Kyler Murray, and that's John Elway.
Oh, for sure. And yeah, you're right. Kyler Murray, if I could feel absolutely comfortable that he is for sure going to stick with the NFL, that he's going to put in the work and energy that it takes to be great, that he's not just putting one foot in, seeing how it is, and then hightailing it out.
Right.
He would probably be my quarterback one, honestly, of this draft. I know there's even the website I work for, there's other guys that disagree with me on that. But I love his game. I think he's a perfect fit, again, with what the Broncos like to do because, I mean, Scangarello said it himself. He said, I want a quarterback that's not afraid to throw deep. What does Kyler Murray do a lot? He throws deep. He likes to run around, get his guys deep down the field, throw it 50 yards like it's nothing, boom, touchdown. And so if you can bring that to the Broncos, I would absolutely love it.
Yeah.
And his running ability, I mean, I saw that they're putting bets on his 40 time at the combine. And he's got an over-under of 4.37.
If he runs a 4.37, oh, man.
He might be the number one pick in the draft. Arizona might go ahead and make that decision.
Yeah.
But I don't think he will, honestly. Not because he can't, but just because he didn't really commit to the whole combine process. And a lot of these guys have been spending months training for that event, where he kind of just made that decision a couple of weeks ago. And so he's only had a couple of weeks of real training to get ready for the combine. I hope that he's gotten somebody better for teaching him how to do interviews, because whoever had him with, who was it? I can't remember who he's on with for that. Dan Patrick. Yep. Oh my gosh. That was the worst interview I think I've ever seen. That was so bad. And I know that there's going to be some teams that are going to be turned off because his dad does control a lot of his life. And that's you don't like to have that parent that's breathing over your neck saying, "What are you doing with my kid? My kid is special." It's that. Have you ever seen the Reddit entitled parents thread?
No, but I've seen LeVar Ball in the NBA.
Yes. Yeah, no team likes that. Parents out there, if you're listening, don't be that parent. It embarrasses your kid.
Don't.
It's just a whole bad situation. Let your kid go and do their thing. But no, I mean, again, if he's committed to football, I would absolutely go crazy. If the Broncos draft him, I'm going to sit there and say, okay, we got somebody that could be absolutely special.
Mm-hmm.
We really did. I do think he has a much higher ceiling than that of Drew Lock. Drew Lock, I don't have those worries that he's going to bolt, obviously. Drew Lock, I don't have as many injury concerns because he has that bigger body, ability to handle some of the hits. He's got a better ability to play from the pocket, more of that understanding of timing and things like that than Kyler Murray. And I think he's a little bit more, honestly, NFL ready because he's been playing quarterback with the idea of going to the NFL for 4 years straight. Kyler Murray, that's not really been his case. So I think he could be a little bit more ready day one. But I don't know. It just, each of these quarterbacks here at the top of this draft, there's things that you can like. There's things I love about Haskins. If we had a different offensive coordinator here, I'd be saying Haskins is easily my number one quarterback. But his game just doesn't fit with what Scangarello has said he wants to do on offense. He is very inconsistent on his deep ball. He's a guy that struggles when there's pressure. He's just not good improving. There we go.
Yeah, just improv. There you go.
Yeah, improv. And those are things that are going to have to be a part of this offense. He's not the greatest at throwing on the move. You're going to see a moving pocket with whoever the quarterback is. And so again, it's just, I think if you brought in Haskins, you'd have to design two different offenses, one for Flacco, one for Haskins. Where I think with Drew Lock and with Kyler Murray, you could probably do a little bit more. I mean, there's going to be some specialty plays, especially for Kyler Murray. But beyond that, I think there's still at least many of the same concepts that you're going to have be the same between those guys.
So I'm going to just drop this thing. I mean, because we all know that it's been well documented. You and I talked about it. You mentioned it a lot earlier, obviously at the beginning of the show, just how Denver is just entrenched and, as the word goes, smitten for Drew Lock.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible, and I can't believe I'm phrasing this because they are smitten for Lock, is it possible that Drew Lock is, in fact, and I hate to use the word, a smokescreen to where they actually are sold on the idea that they do want Kyler Murray?
No.
I know.
And the reason I say that is people that I talk to connected to the Broncos. One, the Broncos are one of the worst teams at keeping secrets. Information gets leaked out of that building like crazy. I mean, I think they don't care as much as other teams. I mean, you go to the Patriots, and you'd probably have an easier time getting into Fort Knox than getting any information out of those people that would be actually honest. The Broncos are just like, we're not going to try to smokescreen anybody. We're just going to tell you how it is. And people I've talked to, they've all said Drew Lock, they absolutely love this kid. They do. It sounds like everybody in the building loves Drew Lock.
Yeah.
They love his personality. They love his game. They think he's a guy that you fix a couple things could really blossom into a star. I just think, and again, then you go and hire a guy like Scangarello who runs a system that would fit his skill set really well. And there's just too many dots that are connected that you sit here and say, this is not a smokescreen. They really do like this kid. Now, here's where the big question comes in. How much?
Right.
Are you willing to trade into the top 5 to make sure that you get this kid?
Yeah, because there was rumors that they wanted to draft your boy, Sam Darnold if he fell. And that
Oh,
didn't
they
happen.
tried to trade up to number 2.
Right.
They had a deal in place with the Giants that was pretty. I mean, it was on the level of what the Redskins traded to get their boy RG3. And the Giants came back last minute and said, "Hey, remember that trade that we agreed to? How about you add an extra first round pick to that?" And the Broncos are like, "Screw you." And so, I mean, you saw what happened. The Giants took their running back, and Sam Darnold's with the Jets. So I know there's some people that are sitting there saying, if the Broncos didn't take a quarterback last year, why would they take one this year? Well, they had 2 quarterbacks they really liked. They wanted either Baker Mayfield or Sam Darnold. Just because they didn't take quarterback doesn't mean that they didn't like quarterbacks in the draft. It's just the 2 that went were the 2 that they were willing to trade up for.
Right.
And then at pick 5, they just didn't see the value in Rosen or Josh Allen. Yeah.
Mm.
And Lamar Jackson, obviously they didn't see the value in him either. And so you have to keep that in mind. Just because they didn't take one of those other 2 guys doesn't mean that they didn't like quarterbacks from this past draft. And again, this year, they like some of the quarterbacks. They're not, I don't think they're absolutely in love to the point of, hey, we got to get up to number 1 pick kind of love. But there's things that they like that they think they can really develop, and they feel like they have a coaching staff that can get the most out of a quarterback this year.
Is it 2020 love then?
Oh, I don't think the 2020 class is as good as people are making it out to be. But I think it's one of those also, if the Broncos don't get their guy at 10, let's say, I don't see them actually trading up for Drew Lock now. Unless it's maybe to pick like 8 or something like that, where they're only giving up maybe a 3rd or 4th round pick. Then you're sitting there saying, hey, that's worth it to get a quarterback. Come on.
Yeah.
But I don't see them trading into the top 5 anymore. And
but to your point though, if he does say fall and the chips fall down to the point where he does fall to the number 10 pick, then by all means, I mean, Drew Lock's going to end up being the pick.
Yeah. I have no doubt in my mind. If Lock is there at 10, he is the Broncos pick. I really have no doubts about that. If he's not there, I really think that they're working to trade back. I think that's kind of the plan right now. I'm not sure who's trading up. It'll just depend on who's there. If they stay there at 10, I'm going to really hope Ed Oliver fell to him. That's my guy. That's the guy I'd really like to see with the Broncos, to get him in that defensive line rotation. And I mean, can you imagine Ed Oliver between Chubb and Von Miller?
I'm just picturing Jadeveon Clowney as my pipe dream signing. So yes, I would like Ed Oliver.
It's the things that they could do with that guy would just be outstanding. I mean, in college, he played nose tackle as a 285-pound guy, and he dominated. So you stick him at 5 tech, oh my gosh, that guy's just going to tear things up. Move him to 3 tech when they go to nickel position. Yeah, I would love that.
So, I mean, then let's just pontificate for the sake of pontification. Cardinals. We don't know for a fact if they'll take a quarterback or not. My guess is they don't. But if they do, then we all know that Josh Rosen is going to more than likely be on the trading block. San Francisco, not going to take a quarterback. Jets, not going to take a quarterback. Oakland, I'm kind of in the middle on. I don't think they take a quarterback.
They are an absolute wild card in this draft.
Right.
I know the quarterback that I know that they really like, that is one that I think they could get with one of their other first round picks. I know that they really like, oh my goodness, I'm spacing on names. Daniel Jones. They coached him at the Senior Bowl. They liked his personality. They liked what he brought to the table. They think he's a very good fit in their very short pass game that they run, that West Coast short passing game. It's why they didn't like Drew Lock as much, because his short pass game is that's the weakest part of his game. And so while Drew Lock was the better quarterback, again, so many times with quarterbacks, you have to look at fit above anything else.
Yeah, and honestly, Carl, it's funny you say that. I actually think, and you're talking about Daniel Jones, I honestly feel the best fit, in my personal opinion, for Daniel Jones is the Giants. Because if he's part of that Cutcliffe clan, then why not? If you're the Giants, and I mean this in all seriousness, and I mean, we all know that Eli Manning is probably going to be there for one more year, but and you and I obviously talked up Kyle Lauletta last year, but he obviously had the slip up um in the season last year, and but I mean, if you have the guy that you could literally make as your Eli Manning clone, by all means, if you're the Giants, go get Daniel Jones. I mean,
Yeah, I don't see the Giants taking him at pick 6. I mean, Haskins is a better version of Daniel Jones and higher ceiling. I think he even has a higher floor, to be honest. And so I think if I'm looking at the Giants, that's who I'm looking at. And I think they might even trade up to get Haskins just to secure him. But if they can't get Haskins, I could see them trading back into the first round to get Daniel Jones. Because I do, you're right. He's a good fit in that short passing game. It's what Case Keenum did really well, but he also had the jump ball throws, and that fits well with having OBJ, all those kind of things there in Giant Land, whatever you want to call it. And so again, that's something I could see. It's just going to be very interesting to see who each team likes, because there's teams that I've heard. I know the Dolphins love Murray, absolutely love him. So I could see them trading up to get Murray. You obviously have the Giants there. Jaguars, what are they going to do? Are they going to go the free agent way, get a Nick Foles? Because I mean, it's easy to draw those lines to them getting Nick Foles, but I talked to Benjamin Albright not too long ago, and he said Nick Foles isn't as well loved around the NFL as many people think. He's well loved by fans, and most fans sit there and say, this guy took a team to the Super Bowl, and then look at him this past season where he came in and they still won a lot of games and were right there in the playoffs. But NFL teams are sitting there saying, no, this guy's more of that borderline starter backup role. And a lot of teams question, how well will he function outside of the Philadelphia system?
Yeah. Dustin Hayes chimes in on our channel, and he says, Stidham. He said Jarrett Stidham were huge prospects last year. Stidham last year.
Mm-hmm.
And he regressed. And now it seems like Stidham is a third round guy and Locke is the third ranked quarterback on some people sports. So yeah, he said it's way too soon to say the 2020 class is loaded.
Right. And that's just it. You saw with Herbert this last year, the guy started the year on fire and the Broncos absolutely loved him. But by the end of the season, he was really struggling. He just was missing wide open guys. His offensive line was not blocking well for him. Some of his guys were dropping passes, and you saw his confidence dip. And I think it was probably a pretty good decision for him to go back. He's going to have a pretty good team around him this next year. But I mean, beyond him, there's Fromm. He's got some limitations to his game that I think work well in college, that do enough in college, but I don't know how they're going to do in the NFL. Tua, again, he doesn't have the greatest arm in the world, and he's got absolute talent around him. He's got 2 first-round caliber receivers. He had a first-round caliber tight end this past year in Irv Smith that I really hope the Broncos take in the second round.
Thank you, Nick Kendall.
Yeah. And, I mean, he's an absolute stud. He had offensive line that was ridiculous. He had 3 starting running backs that he could lean on. And I'm not trying to say that Tua is a bad player or anything, because he's a very, very good player.
Right.
But I don't know how well his game absolutely translates to the NFL. You look at his problems with injuries this past year, and let's just say this next year, that knee just keeps acting up. Well, he goes from everybody saying he's going to be the number 1 overall pick to
Injury.
right. So he become that 3rd round kind of guy.
Right.
So it just, you got to wait for things to play out when it comes, especially to the quarterback market. Who would have ever thought that right now the Haskins would maybe be the top quarterback in this draft?
I know I wouldn't, because I mean, I I watched him struggle against Nebraska, and I saw him struggle in games where really he should have shined. But I mean, tools are there.
Yeah,
The tools are there.
right. I mean, and that's, again, every one of these guys, if you put them in the right system, I think they can shine. Haskins in that West Coast short passing timing system, 3-step drop, balls out of his hands. I think he's perfect for that because he is great at reading defenses. He is great in that intermediate 15 to 0 yards area. And if you can have that kind of system, what the Patriots run, Haskins would be absolutely perfect in that system. He's just very, very good at that and picking people apart. He's got really good accuracy in that area, can fit it into tight windows, all those kind of things. Luck. Again, if you get him more in that air raid system where you're looking for him to go deep, you're getting the ball out of his hands on some screen passes. You're getting in that intermediate area is another area where he's very good. He's just that short area passing is where he can struggle. So
Yeah.
you need a Bruce Arians kind of system for him to really shine.
It's a weird draft this year because, well, and it's a weird draft anyway. Because last year there were a lot of teams that, we were speculating, okay, will this team be interested in Josh Rosen? Will this team be interested in Josh Allen? Will this team be interested in Sam Darnold? Because we all know the Broncos really were interested in Baker Mayfield. Will Baker Mayfield be the number 1 pick? I mean, it's the same thing this year. I mean, the fact is that the Raiders have ammunition. We don't. I mean, we think we know that are committed to Derek Carr, but with now Mike Mayock, now with the Oakland Raiders, who I actually appreciate. I do like Mike Mayock. I like the amount of homework he does. Who knows the amount of homework he's done on a lot of these prospects. So there's the wild card of as far as the Oakland Raiders. Where do the Oakland Raiders go? So that's why I think that it's really that 4 to 7 range where you really have to look at, okay, we could see a lot of quarterback movement to where we could see maybe 2-3 quarterbacks taken within that range, as far as potential trade ups, as far as potential, just stay put selections. I mean, there's just a lot I think that can happen within that 4 to 7 range, because let's just say if Drew Lock just magically falls out of that, then and he moves past 8, honestly, I'm with you, Carl, when we were talking about it. I would not be surprised if the Broncos say even moved up to 9. Because if I remember right, and I'm actually just thought of this off the top of my head, it was reported that the Denver Broncos and the Buffalo Bills had a deal in place last year, right?
They did, yeah.
For their 2 first-round picks to move back if their quarterback, or in essence, really, if the player that they legitimately wanted, either Bradley Chubb or Baker Mayfield or Sam Darnold, were not there, they would trade back. They already had a deal in place.
And that happens a lot.
Right.
The Broncos have already had conversations with every team in the top 9 about what it would take to get to their position.
Right. And so I just thought of that it would not be surprising that, say, Drew Lock falls to 9. Well, the Broncos had already talked with the Bills previously last year about a possible deal. So the opportunity might be there.
Yeah.
for them.
And fans need to know the teams have to have these conversations early. When you have 10, 15 minutes on the clock, I'm sorry, you're not making huge blockbuster deals in that 10 to 15 minutes very often. Like I said, teams are talking beforehand saying, what is it going to take? What do you want for me to move up? Now, yes, teams at the last minute will say, hey, you know what? This pick got a little bit more valuable than we thought. We've had a couple other teams calling. And so maybe they'll play teams off each other a little bit. But beyond that, it's mostly teams know what it's going to take to get there day one. They know that they can go make that phone call real quick and within a couple minutes know if they're going to have that pick or not. So I'm very interested again just to see what a lot of these top teams, because there's some top tier players in this draft. You got Nick Bosa, you got Quinnen Williams, and those are kind of guys that, especially those top 5 picks, probably don't want to miss out on.
Yeah, I mean,
if those guys are there, they're going to sit there and say, I'm sorry, I'm not trading because I see a franchise building kind of player.
Yeah, I mean, heck, I mean, there's also the possibility, Carl, that Nick Bosa might fall to 10. Sorry, I had to pull that.
I know. For those listening, I did a fan speak draft the other day, and Nick Bosa fell to the Broncos at 10. And while we don't need an absolutely pass rusher, I'm sorry, the number 1 player in the draft, yeah, I'm taking him. Thank you.
I had to roll that one in.
Oh yeah.
And I like fan speak. It's one of those things that it just like you just really scratch your head.
Yeah, there's times like I've done that before, and when I got to the Broncos pick at 10, not a single quarterback had even been taken. Yeah. I'm sitting there going, "Come on, you guys know this isn't real, right?" You got to put a little something. I understand it's random in some senses, and they have to do it that way because otherwise, it's like, okay, well, the top 10 picks go exactly the same every time. But I'm sorry. There's just certain things. Nick Bosa making it to pick 10 that would not happen. Honestly, if I'm the Broncos and that happened,
I would take Nick Bosa.
Well, part of me would say yes. Part of me would say I want to see what teams are willing to offer, because I could see a ton of teams in that 11 to 20 range, or even later. I mean, anywhere in the first round, going, we're calling the Broncos and offering as much as we can, because he's that much of a game changer. And especially if you're saying, okay, all the quarterbacks are gone, well, you want to have that draft capital for next season. So team from pick 18 calls you and says, we're going to give you our first round pick this year, first round pick next year, second round pick this year, and maybe a couple other mid-round picks somewhere in there. I'm kind of thinking about it, because again, that helps me to maybe get my guy next year.
Now, the one question that would be had if, say, Nick Bosa did fall would be the Bo Callahan question, where you're starting to call every single one of the teams and be like, okay, why did you pass up on this guy? Like, why? Like, why? Like, what are your red flags? What are you missing that we did not miss? Like, what, you're basically calling every team that passed up on Nick Bosa that just says, okay, what went wrong? Like, yeah.
I'm with you there.
So it's funny you were talking about fan speak, because that happened to me not too long ago when I was doing the manage the cap simulator, and you usually cover your bases and you want to offer multiple players a contract to see if they want to accept it, so on and so forth. Well, it happened with the linebacking core, because I ended up signing Anthony Barr and Jordan Hicks and Deion Buchanan, and they're now part of my linebacking core, which would be a well-versed linebacking core. Now, granted, it would also mean that Josie Jewell and Todd Davis are not going to be on your roster next year. So yeah, it's just a weird thing. Fanspeak, I like it. It's free. It makes me use my brain, which is always a good thing. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a very, the Broncos are, I feel like, and it's not because I'm biased on the team, Carl, but the Broncos are just in this weird situation to where either one move, and it might be the Flacco move, we don't know, that as far as moving the needle, but the Broncos are in that weird situation because it's either maybe, say, a few moves that could really vault them back into playoff contention. And again, the Flacco move might have already done that. But there could be a few moves in free agency that, and even in the draft too, Just it all depends on what they do. That you look at it and you're just like, you know what, this team, and we were saying it's even to all of last year that the team was better than their record indicated. So it's one of those to where the Broncos are just that weird team where they could go back to the playoffs in a heartbeat because of the moves that they could potentially make.
Right. I mean, yeah, they weren't as bad as their record last year, but I guess sometimes they say your record is who you are. But they just they had a really, really tough schedule, having both the Chargers and the Chiefs in their division. And they just never seemed to catch a break on who they were playing from week to week. And so I do think this next year the schedule will be a little bit easier for them. But that's always hard to tell from year to year. I mean, the Chiefs, let's say Mahomes goes down with injury week 5. Well, that completely changes the whole dynamic of the entire NFL layout. I mean, you just saw it with this is college basketball, but Zion going down.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you go from Duke is the hands-on favorite to win the national championship to, maybe he shuts it down the rest of the year, and Duke is not even a top 10 team. And so things can change very, very quickly. Like I said, depending on injuries, how well free agents work out. Let's say we bring in Adrian Amos and he's a all-pro level player, Juwan James, Quan Alexander. I mean, I do think that they can make those 3 big moves, and all of a sudden, especially our defense goes into that top 5 range. And you got guys like Bradley Chubb who takes that next step. Von Miller continues to play at his all-pro level. Chris Harris continues to play at his level. And then you get Juwan James to really cement that offensive line. And, I mean, it's easy to see how they could really vault up quickly in the NFL ranks. I mean, it's why teams can go from worst to first in a hurry.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things I absolutely love about football. You can't do that in baseball very often. Teams can overpay. I mean, we just saw guys get $300 million contracts, and it's crazy what money can be thrown around there. That's why I love the cap. That's why I love the draft, because you get the right player, and boom, it changes everything.
Yeah, and it's funny because I never really had thought about it until I saw the Panthers go 7-9 and make the playoffs. And then the following year they went and had that tremendous year with Cam Newton. I mean, things happen like that. Seattle was the same way. They went beast mode against the New Orleans Saints, and then the following year, I believe, was the Russell Wilson year when Russell Wilson, sorry Bronco fans, won the starting job against us in that preseason game and basically outed Matt Flynn out the door, and the rest is history. And so I think that, I just really never put it all together that things can change rather quickly in the NFL. Who knew that Patrick Mahomes would light it up and end up being the new face of the franchise, or should I say, the new face of the NFL?
Right.
I mean,
I don't even think the Chiefs knew that he would do that.
Right.
I mean, that kind of season is pretty rare. I don't see him going out and having quite that good of a season next year. I didn't think he'd have that kind of season this year, so maybe he could prove me wrong on that. We'll kind of see, because he has a rare arm. He does things that no other quarterback in the league is doing, other than maybe Aaron Rodgers. And I guess that's a little bit of why I really like the idea of getting Locke, because, again, you can surround him with talent. He does some things that other quarterbacks can't do. I think you can easily grow around him. And I think one nice thing is the Broncos set up well to be able to play the Chiefs. If they get that quarterback position figured out and they can add a few more pieces, especially to that defense, which I think they can do through free agency. I think they can add maybe another piece through the draft as well. And all of a sudden, it makes those Chiefs games very, very interesting. I mean,
Right.
they were already great this last year. Broncos almost beat them twice. Really should have beat them at least once. And again, that shows how close they were and how close things are in the NFL. One pass, one play can separate you from being a top 10 draft team to a top 10 team in the league. And so for the Broncos, again, I don't think it's going to take a ton for them to be able to get back and be a very, very competitive team. And I think they have the ammunition, having a top 10 pick. They're going to have plenty of cap space. There's still going to be some cuts that they're going to make. I mean, Leary could be a cut. Darian Stewart, I know, is going to be a cut. And so there's some moves that can help them to be able to get more aggressive in free agency that are probably going to happen.
Yeah.
And
And not to mention, obviously, the other moves from other teams to where we might see a surprise player release that may not have been on the radar originally, that all of a sudden it's just like, oh, like for instance, you mentioned a few of the Pittsburgh Steelers players. That Marcus, was it Gilbert?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, Marcus Gilbert could be one of those surprising guys where you just all of a sudden look at it and you go, oh, let's drive our Elway sponsored Ford F-150 down and go track down Marcus Gilbert. Yeah. So if you're predicting it right now, as we'll kind of wrap it up here, if you're kind of predicting it, if you're predicting the free agent moves for the Broncos, and I'll do the same thing here after you're done. What are your predictions? If you're looking at it from February 22nd, and a lot changes from February 22nd to March 13th, just ask Kirk Cousins and the Denver Broncos. What are your predictions in free agency?
All right. Well, one, I'm going to predict Case Keenum is traded. I don't think the Broncos are going to get anything back. They might even give up an extra pick where they trade Case Keenum in a 7th round pick for a 7th round pick. But that's just to get him off the books. So I do think that will happen. I could see Sanders cut or traded. I think the Broncos are deciding to move forward into to get younger at the position for their weapons. I like Sanders, but he's had some off-field issues. He's coming off a very serious injury. He's a big cap hit. So I could see that happening for sure. And then actual free agents that I see the Broncos bringing in, first and foremost, I think Juwan James is a guy that is absolutely at the top of their list. I do think they'll bring back Billy Turner. And so then there's your two offensive line moves that I think the Broncos will make. I do think Adrian Amos, if he gets to free agency, he is one of the first calls the Broncos make, if not the first call. I really think that they're going to be aggressive in getting him because he is such a perfect fit. And again, you know what you're getting. You know, in the Fangio system, this guy is an absolute star. So that one, it's way too obvious that one's probably going to happen. And then the other one, if he can hit free agency, Quan Alexander, I really do think. I wish it would be CJ Mosley because I like him a little bit more than Quan. But from what I understand, Baltimore's doing everything possible to keep him. They've really upped their offer, and it sounds like CJ Mosley and them are very, very close to getting a deal done very soon. And so for me, again, Quan Alexander added to the linebacker core. Could be KJ Wright. I think he's maybe if Quan doesn't get to them. And then Jonathan Hankins, I know Benjamin Albright tweeted out today that the Broncos are interested in him. I think he's kind of that second tier signing for the Broncos, that he's a little bit better than what Pecco is at this time. And so it makes a lot of sense. And then I see, maybe a cornerback being brought in. I see a Pierre Desir added to the cornerback group.
You really like this Pierre Desir.
I do. I liked him in college. I remember he was like my guy that when I really started getting interested in the draft, and he was like my first like diamond in the rough find. And I just remember, I was on a message board at that time, and just going, guys, you should check out this Desir guy. I think he can be something special. And they're like, who? You need to look at this guy. He's awesome. And he didn't start out great. I mean, going from small school guy and trying to make that leap to the NFL, but you just saw it, the growth every year while he was in the NFL. And I just think he's such a good fit. And I don't think he's going to be the most expensive guy out there. I think you're going to see some other guys like Darby and a few others that get a little bit more money. And the Broncos are going to say, well, we don't really like this cornerback group, but we'd still like to have that veteran added. And I could see him being that guy added for the Broncos.
All right. So let's see. I'm going to take a crack at it too. I'm going to say that Juwan James and Adrian Amos are the two logical additions that get made. I do think they do make an addition at tight end. And I'm actually going to say, so this is going to surprise some people. I think that they do sign a tight end, and I do think it's from the Cincinnati Bengals, but I do not think it's Tyler Eifert.
Okay.
I mean, I actually just looked at it and I just saw that Tyler Croft and CJ Uzuma is out there, but Tyler Croft showed up pretty well and might be, I guess, the more healthier option of Eifert. But I mean, yeah, I would, and then the other guy I would probably say is Luke Wilson. But I mean, I don't know. I would like to go out and get a guy like an Austin Safarian Jenkins and a Jared Cook who, you know, seemed like he drank the fountain of youth last year with Oakland and had about an 800-yard catch season. And I would like to get a Tyler Eifert. I think that he's very much the sneaky option. But I kind of like the idea of a Tyler Croft or Max Williams. Maybe as what is it? Yeah, I mean, maybe a Jeff Hireman if they want to bring him back. I think that Jeff Hireman would be an ideal guy to bring back. But Max Williams, Tyler Croft, I mean, I think are two interesting guys for me. And then for corner, so let's see. I think for corner, that's another one I'm going to sort of swing for the fences on. Not necessarily as a not necessarily, should I say, as a logical guy, but one that I think that they'll bring in. So it won't be a Ronald Darby as much as I would like it to be. I'm gonna, and I would like to say Bryce Callahan just because of the familiarity. I'm gonna take a chance, and I'm gonna just say that they bring in Darqueze Dennard. So kind of, I guess, the Cincinnati theme here, but I think that Darqueze Dennard would be an interesting one. And then as far as linebacker, I'm going to say Quan Alexander. So just to reiterate, I just think that when he was paired with Levante David, who, by the way, I think is, in my opinion, the most underappreciated, underrated linebacker in the entire NFL. He does not get credit like he deserves. As far as where he stands in the NFL, when he and Quan Alexander were together, both of them, they fit each other well. Quan Alexander proved to be a tackling machine, and he proved to be well more athletic to cover running backs and tight ends. And I think that, you know, he clearly proved to be a lot more versatile than I think a lot of people thought when it came to Quan Alexander. So I think that Quan Alexander would be absolutely incredible if they can do it. But I guess the interesting thing, or the interesting one, would be if they do want to say trickle down and go say the veteran route and get a guy like a Thomas Davis if they want to. But I mean Thomas Davis came out and said that I don't think he wanted to retire. So
yeah, I don't see him having much left, and I don't trust those knees to hold up for an entire season.
No, I don't. But the interesting one though, and I say it too, Deion Buchanan and just the whole Jamal Carter-ness with it, I would not be surprised, and it's not Deion Buchanan, but I would not be surprised if we see Jamal Carter get first team reps in training camp. So that's sort of an in-house addition, should I say, is Jamal Carter getting a lot of first team reps in training camp.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my also self in-house plug with Jamal Carter, because I just don't think that gets talked enough at all. Because I mean, he sustained that injury in preseason, and he had so much versatility, and he really was a great player when he hit the field, and he showed it as far as being a safety. But now you get Vic Fangio in the mix, and it just only makes that safety unit really that much better. And then you factor in Trey Marshall as well. I mean, I think the safety unit is still whole, but I think that the addition of Trey Marshall really is something that completely goes unnoticed. Sorry, I mean Jamal Carter.
Yeah.
So what do you feel about Jamal Carter? I mean, am I just sort of talking it up a little bit too much? But I mean,
I mean, he's a nice piece for sure. I don't see him as being that like long-term consistent star kind of guy. And I feel like, especially with Fangio, a lot of his guys play their more traditional roles. With Joe Woods and even with Wade Phillips, they needed a lot more hybrid kind of players. I mean, that's just kind of the way the NFL is going. But with Fangio, he likes his guys to be their one position and just do it really well. And so like safeties, you want your free safety to be a true free safety. You're going to ask him to do a few different things, but nothing too crazy. I mean, that was part of Justin Simmons' problem this last year, was he was being played in way too many positions. And so I like Jamal Carter. I think he's going to be on the team, but I just I don't know. It's just not. He's not my favorite player for sure by any means. And there's things that I really like and things that I sit there and say, yeah, there's some limitations. And even the idea of him playing like that linebacker spot, he's a little bit small, obviously, and teams would sit there and look at that and say, okay, we're going to run right at this guy. I know he's strong. I know he can get after people, all those kind of things. But I guess I like Will Parks more if I'm having a guy that's playing more of that hybrid role. I don't know what's going to happen with Sua Cravens. We'll see on some of that because he could play some of that hybrid role. But I think, at least what I saw this last year, Will Parks was the guy that really fit that the most.
He took a significant leap that I don't think people are even talking enough about, really, with Will Parks. I don't know where he will fit, but yeah, it's going to be a very interesting. It's going to be a very interesting offseason for all the moves that do potentially get made either in the draft, free agency. But nonetheless, it gets exciting because at the same time, it gets really easy to talk yourself into something. And so that's why it does get a little bit cautious, because say you talk yourself into the fact that the Broncos are a much better football team than, say, where they were, a year ago. Well, just how better are they than a year ago? That's really the ultimate question for me. And I think that's sort of why it comes back to the quiet optimism or the quiet confidence, the just that cautious optimism, as you talked about early on. It's just, I'm optimistic with the addition of Joe Flacco, knowing the fact of as far as the weapons around it, and being confident that the moves that'll be made on defense.
Right. Well, I mean, it's the season of optimism for all fan bases. You always kind of think, okay, last year, if you didn't win the Super Bowl, you always think, okay, if my team makes these few moves, maybe we can get into that kind of conversation. I mean, I'm guessing even like the Rams right now, they're looking at, okay, what do we got to do this offseason to get that next step to being that Super Bowl champion? I I question a little bit. They're going to lose some pieces this offseason. I think they're one of those teams that could take a pretty decent fall.
Yeah.
I mean, they're missing some key pieces that were big for their team this last year, and so we'll see what happens with them. But
it's funny you say that, because I actually was talking to Nick on our group chat, and how would you feel? I mean, it's more of a biased and strong opinion, should I say, but also a real opinion. How would you feel if, because I mean, it seems like Ndamukong Suh could fit that particular role, but also from what I was told through Nick is that the Denver Broncos might not be interested in him. But it seems like Ndamukong Suh, as far as a business deal, and we all know that he does business deals now. It seems when he took that Los Angeles Rams contract of the 1 year, if he ends up leaving, which there's a possibility he might, would you consider that if you're the Denver Broncos, if you want to maybe kickstart your defensive line with a guy that's going to open up a lot of opportunities for you, knowing the fact that he does exceptionally well, sucking up double teams?
I mean, I wouldn't mind it, honestly. I think he's still got plenty. I think he showed this last year. He was still a pretty tough piece to move, and he could get into the backfield and make some plays. I don't think he's the perfect fit for the Broncos. He's more plays on that 4-man front than the 3-man, but the Broncos play a ton of 4-man front too. So I guess that's not as big of a deal as it used to be. I think he's maybe going to want to go to a bigger competitor than what the Broncos are right now. I mean, I could see him staying with the Rams. I could see him going to the Patriots even, which that would be very frustrating. I could see him going to the America's team, the Cowboys, and trying to add a nice piece with DeMarcus Lawrence to give them a nice 1-2 punch there on their defensive line. But for the Broncos, it wouldn't be the worst piece. I just think with their defensive line, they're trying to get young. They already got an older guy in Wolf that they're wanting to keep around and maybe even redo his deal, from what I understand. And he seems open to it because he wants to retire a Bronco. And
he seems like the ideal Bronco. Same with Chris Harris Jr.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And he said he wants to retire after playing 10 years in the NFL. So he's got 3 more years left. And we'll see what he does. I think Suh's a better player than Wolf, obviously, but right. You already got Suh on your team, and I don't think he's quite the headache that sometimes Suh can be. And I mean, although Suh's really cleaned up a lot of that stuff, it's not as bad as it used to be when he was with Detroit, especially. But
we can thank Jim Schwartz for that.
Yeah, that's true. And but no, I guess it's one of those. I like the development of Gotsis. And obviously you have Shelby Harris, who had a very good season as well on that defensive line. So really, if I'm looking at adding a piece, I'm looking more at a draft pick to really develop and keep going with that group, more so than adding a Suh or
a Hankins or.
Well, I mean, I don't mind Hankins because he replaces Pecco. But I'm thinking more, if I'm adding Suh, I'm adding him to be more of that 5-tech defensive end. He can play that 0-tech, 1-tech nose tackle too, because he's got some decent size to him. But I'm thinking more of him on the edge a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And so, again, I think we've got some pieces there. If we added Ed Oliver in the draft, I'd be excited just because he adds the rotation. And it could be one of those where we're looking at saying, okay, well, we're not going to pay Gotsis. We're not going to pay Shelby Harris. So we need to start adding to that group because right now, what's his name? DeMarcus
Lawrence? Or no. DeMarcus, the guy from Clemson. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm thinking DeMarcus Walker. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. DeMarcus. Oh, yeah.
I mean, he hasn't really done anything for the Broncos so far. and I don't see him really taking it to the next level if he hasn't at least shown something by this point. And so, I mean, they could be looking at that defensive line saying, okay, we got to get some new pieces because we got some pieces getting ready to head out the door. And I mean, Zach Kerr could be gone. Tomato Pecco, it sounds like he could be gone. So again, I understand the need at defensive line, but I just don't think Sue's that guy.
Right. All right. Well, dude, Carl, this was amazing. It was definitely a jam packed episode. It was bringing back the flashbacks, should I say, of having those long episodes. Doing 30 minutes um, at the primary podcast that I do over at Lockdown Broncos as the co-host with Cody. It gets hard to try and jam and you know this being over with building the Broncos. It gets hard to try and jam pack so much information into a 30 to 35-minute episode.
Right. Oh, I understand. I mean, we went to 2 shows a week, and we thought, okay, we'll just make it 2 30-minute shows instead of 1 hour show. Well, now we have 2 1-hour shows. And I feel really bad because Nick does all of our editing. And so he has to really take on a little bit more work than before. But you know us, we love talking football, and we could talk all day. I mean, I told you, my wife and kid are gone. And right. I'm sitting here going, man, I'm energized. I'm pumped up just talking football right now. And so I appreciate you having me on, man. I really do. It's been fun. I love talking this. This is, some of these subjects, it's one of those, like I said, we're trying to do a show and get enough time in. We've had guests on. Sometimes I don't just get to just talk. And so I appreciate you just letting me come on here and just talk, man.
Well, I think that's sort of always been my MO with the Cameron Parker show, and it's just conversational. I mean, having that ability to just be open, talk for a good amount of time, I think it just kind of loosens up the juices a little bit, and gets to the point where it's like what should we say? It's like a podcast forum, should we say? Where I mean, you might have a lot of voices per se. I mean, you were on with where we did that huge crossover with I believe it was Cody and Sayre and where we did that. I believe it was the Mile High Huddle predominantly orange crossover is what you were a part of. So that was a lot of fun, just because we had a lot of competing voices and it just sort of fit into what exactly we like to do here. But and the other thing too is that what makes it so easy when you and I talk together is it isn't just football that you and I hit it off on. Like that's the cool part. Like you and I can talk Nuggets basketball probably for I don't know another hour, and we would still find plenty to talk about just because that's just what we do. And obviously football is where we generate the most conversation, the most talk. But I mean, yeah, the Denver Nuggets, I mean, we could talk about it a lot till the dogs come home on that one.
Right. I mean, I've been paying attention a little bit more. I love the Nuggets this year. I love what they're doing. That kind of, I mean, we talk about with the NFL and those unknown teams that kind of come out of nowhere. And the Nuggets are that young team that everybody's like, oh my gosh, this team has something. And so it's nice to see. I love the youth of their team. They're funny. Some of their interviews that they do crack me up big time. I mean, I'm not a Rockies fan, so I'm not going to talk about the Rockies a whole lot. And I'm not going to try to be Stephen A. Smith and think I'm knowledgeable in every sport.
Yeah,
I have a little bit of knowledge of it,
or think you're knowledgeable about it. Act like you're knowledgeable about it, and then completely come off like a total buffoon.
Yes. Yeah. So I'll stick to my lane of football for the most part. But yeah, I do love talking to other sports, and it's nice to see some of our other teams doing well.
Oh yeah,
and it just hopefully the Broncos can join them this next season and get back to what we love.
Well, and I always just put it best. It's going to be a Broncos town for a very long time until the Denver Nuggets win like back to back championships, or the Rockies go to multiple World Series appearances, or the Colorado Avalanche win back to back Stanley Cup. I mean, it's going to be a Broncos town. However, that all being said, it's like when the Rockies went on the winning ways last year, and then when the Avalanche win and were what was winning, it's one of those where it was just refreshing to just see a town really become a sports town again. Like that was just the refreshing part about it. Like seeing the Nuggets just come out of nowhere and compete the way that they did, and then now have it translate to this year where they might be maybe the best team in the NBA or even maybe the best team in the Western Conference. I mean, it's just been refreshing. And then same thing with the Rockies last year. It's just I think that to me has just been the more, I guess, underrated talk as far as Denver sports talk or just Denver sports in general, um, between the Rockies and Nuggets, really.
Yeah. No, it is. It's nice. I do think, like you said, Nuggets, man, they won again tonight, 114 to 104 against the Mavericks.
Started out slow too.
And but it's I keep thinking when they get MPJ off of injury, I mean, if that guy becomes even like 75% of the hype of what people have been saying this guy could be, he can take him to a whole new stratosphere.
He's changed real quick. I mean, obviously before we go, I think I said that about twice, and here we go. We're going on our
I
conversation.
know. Like I said, we can keep talking forever here, man.
But it's like you and I were talking before. If he can be that humble guy, and if you actually go back and you look at, I believe it was the video that got shared by Sports Spectrum or something along those lines. He honestly, I am super super impressed with the kid. Like he's winning me over as far as the humility of the man. Obviously, his talent, because just because you don't get talked up as far as potentially being a number one draft pick, barring injury, if you are that talented. And that was Michael Porter Jr. A lot of people felt like he should have been the number one pick in the draft, and then the Nuggets, who and you follow them,
Yeah.
also, of all the teams really in the last 5 to 10 years that have absolutely needed luck to fall their way, that wasn't a lottery pick, it was the Nuggets. And Michael Porter Jr. fell to them. And now it's the same thing with Isaiah Thomas now with him now being on the bench, and being a significant role player for the team. They needed that type of guy to where, oh, they now have developed a lot of these guys that could be significant players down the road, like Gary Harris and Nikola Jokic, who, I mean, to be honest, if you guys have not seen Nikola Jokic play basketball at all, I don't know. I'm going to start questioning what's wrong with you. But I mean, you have this guy in your back pocket. I mean,
Yeah.
Michael Porter Jr. That's going to further you winning basketball games. And I saw his mixtape or whatever you want to call it of his rehab. If he looks that right now, I mean, I'm scared. If I'm the rest of the NBA, I'm scared.
Yeah.
Just because
you think about the passers that the Nuggets have in Murray and Jokic, and I mean both those guys, if they can feed it out there to MPJ and he's wide open for a three, that guy's knocking it down. Yeah. And it gives them that three true stars.
Or four, really, with Gary Harris and Nikola and Jamal and now MPJ.
Yeah, Harris I don't quite put into that tier, but beyond, I mean, he's still up there. He's still a good player. He's a very good role player that the Nuggets definitely need. IT, he's become a good role player. Plumlee, I wish he was a little bit more, but yeah, he is what he is.
Yeah.
And I mean, you think about it even next year, say a team or a player hits free agency and they're sitting there saying, look at this Nuggets team.
I know.
Man, I can go there and win some championships.
Which never what we would have said.
Right.
And it's a lot like the guys of the Broncos right now. I mean, so that's the thing too, that I think a lot of things go completely unnoticed. with free agency. You so to use a baseball comparison on this one, I think that and it's why the San Francisco Giants are a huge player for Bryce Harper because they have a new stadium that's being built by the Golden State Warriors. It's like right next door to them. And what better chance to compete with the Golden State Warriors in town than bring in a significant guy that's going to generate a lot of revenue, generate a lot of fans, bring them to the stadium, and Bryce Harper. It's kind of like that same thing with basketball and even football, to the point where, okay, here's this opportunity where we can bring guys, and we saw it with Brandon Marshall and some of these players recruiting Paul Millsap to Denver. So I mean, it's just like there's that effect, I think, that could now start coming into effect with the Nuggets, them winning games, them now being real players in one of the most difficult conference. So I'm with you. It could really generate a lot of free agents to come to the Nuggets, which we can never say before. So
right. When it's basketball's so weird in the whole recruiting process. I mean, you look at like for the Broncos, a lot of what NFL players are looking at is 1, money, 2, organizational structure, 3, facilities, type of players they have around them, all those kind of things. And where basketball players are more looking at where can I get the most like publicity? Go to New York, go to Miami, go to LA. It's that kind of mentality of go to these big cities that are going to get me a lot of attention.
Right.
And there's just a lot more marketability of there's so few players in the NBA compared to the NFL. And so you're looking more for your chance to market yourself and make that 20 million extra a year just in marketing. Where NFL, because it's so nationwide and loved so much more, they can be a lot more, oh, I'm going to go to Kansas City. I'm going to go to, to Cleveland, places like that you're just like, oh, wow. Okay.
Right.
And so it's a little bit different. And the Nuggets have been hurt by that in the past, that they're not really a great market per se. But again, sometimes it does come down to you sit there and say, I'm going to get a pretty good market because this team is good. And so I'll be interested to see what they can do with free agency next year. I'm interested to see, I think they almost have too much depth right now, which is such a weird thing to say, but it is kind of that way right now of you're trying to find minutes. You're trying to make sure everybody gets their time and
make them happy.
You're trying to make them happy because, as we've seen with those alpha players, they want their opportunities. So I could see some trades made, or they can build in other ways, package some players together for one player. I think the Nuggets could put together maybe the best trade possibility to go get Unibrow.
That would be, oh man.
I don't know if he's a great fit though. That's always been my big question with him being added to the Nuggets.
Well, I just think of the fit between he and Jokic. We already saw a combination play. It was one, but of the 82 game season that will happen, but it was one between he and Plumlee, Jokic and Plumlee. I just, oh man. And Jokic is already, in my opinion, the best passing big man I think I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And you pair him with Jokic, or Anthony Davis, I just, and the ability for him to stretch the floor. Oh man. I don't think it's going to happen, but
no, I don't either.
But you just certainly drool at the possibility, because it would require probably you giving up a Jamal Murray or someone like that, or maybe an Isaiah Thomas just to throw him in there.
Yeah.
But I think
I'm not as attached to Murray as a lot of other Nugget fans are. Just because I love Monty Morris behind him.
He is so good.
I think he's one of the more underrated players in basketball this season. And so I feel like you can handle the loss of Murray a little bit more. I don't want to get rid of MPJ just because I think the potential for him to be a top 5 NBA player
is
is there.
real.
Yeah.
It's real.
And so I really don't want to have him be a part of the trade to go get AD, but I don't know. I mean, it's one of those, again, I just don't know what the
basketball's weird in that regard though. Like,
yeah.
yeah. It's just weird. It's like giving up a first round pick in the NFL, but that first round pick is a player. Right? If that
Yep.
makes any sense.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, Michael Porter Jr., a guy that's 6'10", should absolutely not be as athletic as he is. I mean, you just see the stuff that he does, and it's just like he is way more athletic than Kevin Durant, and you can understand why some people have been comparing him to Kevin Durant. It's just insane.
He's got the sweetest shot. I mean, he looks so smooth shooting.
Yeah, and it's quick.
Yeah.
Like, oh man,
so if he has anything on defense, that guy, I think, again, top 5 player in the NBA, if he can stay healthy. That's always going to be the big question with him, because anytime you have a 6'10" guy with back problems, not usually a good combination. Yeah. But we'll kind of see how that all plays out for the Nuggets. I do think they're the best team in Denver right now of all the different teams. I mean, it's pretty obvious they're top 4 in basketball and have a chance to really take out some top teams. And hopefully we'll see a championship for them sooner than later.
Yeah, they have yet to win one. They were really close in 2009, which, I mean, again, this team's way better than the 2019 when that 2019 made the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. And who would have thought that the second best team would be starting in spring training on their game tomorrow? I mean, that's just even another crazy thing. I mean, because you go from Nuggets, Rockies to Broncos to Avalanche right now, or maybe Avalanche and Broncos. Broncos
higher than the Avalanche.
Yeah, it's just that crazy time though, where it always will fluctuate based on the season and weeks and months, what have you, just because of the plays of the teams, and because the Broncos have stunk the past 3 seasons.
Yeah,
so that obviously has a lot of influence into it. But yeah, man, any plans for the weekend?
Working on some NFL news and well, Broncos news, obviously. I got a few article ideas that I have floating around, and so I'm excited for those to get out there. Got one on Courtland Sutton and what Joe Flacco means to him. And it's not
terrible, right?
Yeah. No, and it's actually not even about his deep ball ability. There's an underrated quality that he had in college that wasn't taken advantage of as much last year as it should have been, mostly because of Case Keenum.
You mean like him being able to run like a gazelle and take those yards after catch off those short passes? And
are you reading my mind right now?
I am pulling a Nick Kendall.
Yes, you are, because that's exactly what I'm writing on it. Yeah, that was one of his underrated qualities in college. When he had an opportunity for yards after catch in college, the guy that came into contact with him first only made the tackle about 20% of the time. He could make that first guy miss, and his open field speed, quickness, all that kind of stuff, it's underrated. He is a man that you just don't want to see running at you if you're a secondary player. And last year, I know he had some drops, so that didn't help, but Case Keenum's inability to throw over the middle of the field probably hurt Courtland Sutton more than anybody. And I wanted to write an article on that, of what Joe Flacco can do for him, of just adding to his repertoire of what he brings to the table for sure.
I know it's going to sound a lot of really far-fetched, but there is a reason why, for the people that are listening, there is a reason why a lot of the players, offensively, defensively, said that Courtland Sutton is Megatron Jr. I mean, you don't play football from Pee Wee all the way through college and into the pros without seeing at least a blip of talent all throughout your years. And so there's a reason why they called him Megatron Jr.
He's got some special talent.
Yeah.
You get him a quarterback that can actually take advantage of that talent, and he works on his route running a little bit. I mean, it's kind of like DT when he came to the league, he was so raw, but you just saw that this guy, if he could maximize his talent, would become a physical freak in the NFL. And there for a while, he was a top 10 receiver. And I mean, 1,400 yards, 12 touchdowns was pretty common there during the Manning years. And again, so if you can get, I think Cortland Sutton's a better talent, at least a wide receiver talent than DT.
100%. I agree with you.
So the sky is high for that kid. Yeah. And if he puts in the work this offseason, there's no stopping that kid.
No.
And you get him another offensive weapon to work with, or like say you add Irv Smith to that offense. And defenses are going to be sitting there saying, you got Phillip Lindsay and Freeman in the backfield. You got Cortland Sutton on one edge. You got Irv Smith running up the middle. You got Deshaun Hamilton destroying the middle of the field. I mean, there's a lot of things you can get excited about for that offense moving forward. And especially if you get a young quarterback and they sit there and say, look what I got. I got all these fun weapons to play with. So,
yeah, I mean, and even then, I mean, say you get a young quarterback and you come back in the first round and you snag Noah Fant, just to talk Big Ten, because as we all know, and it isn't just because I love the Big Ten, but the Broncos absolutely love Big Ten tight ends. I would be doing jumping jacks. Nick would be doing jumping jacks. I know you would probably be doing jumping jacks. If you had a Jake Butt and Noah Fant combo, or even I don't know, I think Troy Fumagalli is not getting talked about enough, but I mean, just the opportunity for, say, a Noah Fant, who is massive as far as the receiving threat, and just the opportunity for him to spread the field with a guy like a Joe Flacco, and as big as he is, oh man.
Yeah, those seam routes would be ridiculous. I don't even know what you do as a team.
Like, I mean, I like Irv Smith, but it seems like maybe Noah Fant seems like the better option maybe for. And I mean, I haven't done a lot of film study. You've done a lot of film study, obviously, with you and Nick, and it just seems to me like Noah Fant, with the addition of Joe Flacco, might end up being maybe the better option. I mean, I would say TJ Hawkinson. I just don't think TJ Hawkinson's going to be there.
Right. TJ Hawkinson's the best fit because he's the most like George Kittle. And that's exactly what Scangarello had last year when you're looking at the 49ers and how they use George Kittle. Hawkinson's the perfect fit. I would say probably the second best fit is Irv Smith. He has a little bit more of that inline tight end ability to hold up one-on-one in blocks. You just didn't see that with Noah Fant, that they were using him as that kind of tight end. It doesn't mean he can't do it.
Right.
But they had him more as that slot tight end, and that's very valuable. Obviously, his talent's going to be used somewhere, and I just hope it's not with the Patriots. But yeah, if the Broncos can figure out a way to get him, I'm still going to be very happy about that. I would take any of those three, and I would be doing jumping jacks. I would be running 10 miles and probably not be tired because I'd be still so excited about the pick. It's just, yeah, he would be great for the Broncos. All of them would be. And just had the unique weapon that the Broncos have not had probably since Shannon Sharp, honestly.
Yeah, all three really. I mean, I've compared T.J. Hawkinson to the great Jay Novacek. I mean, that's just how good I think T.J. Hawkinson is. And I mean, Noah, I honestly don't know what to compare for Noah, just because he's just that receiving threat that is just different, and he's just that guy that we haven't really had at all here, and all three of them really. I mean, I would just say that maybe. I don't know. and obviously, I'm probably a lot more high on Jake Butt than you guys are, but it's one of those where I think that he's just so undervalued that he might end up turning into being Flacco's favorite target because he did emerge. He did emerge before his ACL injury. He did emerge as a reliable target, which you can't say that very often when you think about a guy that comes into the league that was theoretically his rookie season, and for him to emerge pretty quickly, either in OTAs and into training camp, and then the first 3 weeks of the season show up as a guy that is going to have clutch situations and third down, and come up big on game-winning drives. I mean, you just rarely see that from a guy that was off the field for all of the 2017 season.
Yeah, I like Jake, but I just really don't trust him to stay healthy. And so if we get anything from him, it's just icing on the cake right now if he can become something for the Broncos. And I think if you can add a true starter and then have him be that number 2 tight end, I think that would be the best setup for the Broncos. We'll see what kind of happens with that, but I'm interested to see what he does this year. Yeah. But again, it's one of those, if he adds any kind of production for the Broncos, it's just extra.
Right. And I think for me, I mean, and you and I were talking last year when the Broncos drafted Troy Fumagalli. I thought that probably Fumagalli was probably a lot better of a tight end than a lot of people gave him credit for, just because of the simple fact he didn't have a good quarterback with him. And but that said, I think that the Broncos do feel very highly about Jake Butt, and it did say that they are pretty confident in Jake Butt to make that recovery. Obviously, it reared its ugly head and did itself again, which is just fate. I mean, people want to say, well, Lauren Lano's an issue with it. And she's like, no, tearing your ACL is just, as fate would have it, it's just an unfortunate thing. And so that's just a part of injuries. And I think that for Jake Butt, it's just a frustrating thing, I think, but I don't know. It said a lot, I thought, for the Broncos and them not taking a tight end until well into the 5th round, much like they did Jake Butt. But I think that they are just so confident and optimistic with him, just as far as a tight end is concerned. So I don't know. It's just sort of how I felt about it with the draft. And I mean, it'll be interesting this year, though, because this class is better than the 2017 class where Jake Butt was drafted, without question.
Yeah.
So if they do not take a tight end at all, or at least up until the mid rounds, like say a Jay Sternberger, which I know that you've been high on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then that tells you enough, really, in particular, this particular draft, that shows you a lot as far as the confidence that they do have in Jake Butt.
Yeah. I mean, Sternberger, to me, most drafts would be the 3rd or 4th tight end taken. He probably won't be till about maybe the 8th or 9th in this draft,
which is like the 5th to 7th round.
Right. And so, I mean, it just, again, shows the power of this group and why the Broncos maybe can feel comfortable waiting on that position a little bit. If they see a talent there, don't pass it up, take it, because it's a position that has been weak for a long time, and stop messing around with it. But there's enough there that if they have close gradings at other positions, I wouldn't mind them taking other positions and waiting on tight end till that day 3. So we'll kind of see. There's Dawson Knox as well as another one that I really like, that I think could be a huge weapon on that offense. But it's going to be, I'm excited for Combine starting this next week and kind of getting some more information, especially you get a lot of contract talk more than I like more of the free agency stuff than the draft stuff that comes out of the Combine.
I'm kind of with you on that, because I mean, that's usually where, so in baseball standards, we had the winter meetings, right, in December.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's usually where you have the pre-MLB trade deadline talk, the pre-stuffs like trades, news, what have you, that's usually where it gets kickstarted. And it might happen into some trades or what have you, at the, the NFL combine, that might actually happen. But as far as news and rumors and everything galore, because that's like one big, massive GM meeting, I mean, with everybody there, the opportunity for a lot of rumors and a lot of things to leak is much greater at the NFL combine. And that's why, and if we're going to circle back on Kirk Cousins a little bit, that's where things started to circle backwards on the Broncos, because that's where things started to leak that said that, hey, Kirk Cousins might not be as interested in the Denver Broncos as we all originally had thought.
Right. Well, and it was also where the Broncos were like, this contract's getting crazy.
Well, and I'm sure as it was leaked during the season that Joe Ellis stepped in and said that, hey, we should go get Case Keenum. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, I mean there will be. It's kind of that illegal legal tampering time.
Yeah,
it's so weird. I wish the NFL would just go, okay, we're gonna stop acting like we're better than we are. We know these guys talk. We know that teams and agents are already talking right now.
I mean,
they've been talking throughout the entire season. So don't sit here and try to tell me that's not the case. It just,
I mean, heck, the Broncos consummated a trade for Joe Flacco, and Joe Flacco has to at least come to Denver and take a physical.
Right.
So, I mean, they're still talking.
Yeah. So things are already happening. I mean, there's things I can't say on this show that I know of conversations going on, but it's just the way of the NFL. And teams are not going to wait when they need to figure out what they're doing for their future. And everybody does it. I mean, that's the thing. So it's why I don't see why the NFL is so big on, hey, teams can't talk until this period. Well, no. You know what's going on. Stop. It's kind of like when baseball was trying to cover up steroids, and we're like okay with it because it was bringing in lots of fans. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait, we have to be really strict on this because steroids are bad.
Right. Because it's bolted to our wall.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely, but it's probably one of the reasons why it takes away from the NFL Combine too. And I'm kind of like of that rare guy where I do like the NFL Combine, even though they call it the Underwear Bowl. Like I'm kind of the rare guy where I don't mind watching a guy jump in compression shorts in the long jump or the broad jump or him jumping in his compression shorts 40 feet in the air in a vertical jumper, or him, running a 4.5 and a 40-yard dash in his compression short. I don't mind it really.
Yeah, it's another piece of the puzzle. Like, I think there's some that take it too serious. Like the Raiders took it too serious there for a while, where they just took the fastest guy at the combine every year, and it was just pretty obvious what they were going to do. But for the most part, like I said, it's just more of another piece added to the puzzle. If you get to see, like for me, there's some players I want to see what their numbers are. Baker from Georgia, I want to see what he runs in the 40, because 40 time actually matters for cornerbacks. There are plays where they're running 40 yards down the field. I'm not as worried about the 40-yard dash for a defensive lineman
or quarterback, really.
Right. I mean, I'm more worried about their 10-yard split than I am their 40-yard time.
Yeah, I mean, the only guy for a quarterback that we would ever be worried about for a 40-yard time that we would be glued to is Kyler Murray.
Right. I don't. Drew Lock running a good or bad 40 time isn't going to change my evaluation of him.
Right. If he runs a 4.7, 4.8, that's right.
It's not great, but it's not anything. Again, yeah, it's going to take me too much away from him. Kyler Murray running a 4.8, I'm going to go, yeah, I'm not drafting that guy.
Right.
There's a big difference there in what you're expecting from that kind of player. But again, it's just one of those adds to the picture, and those guys who you have closely rated, sometimes these numbers can separate them.
And honestly,
so let's go ahead.
And honestly, is there really a difference between the NFL Combine and the Pro Day? I mean, theoretically, I mean,
Well, I'd say the biggest difference is every player is being measured and evaluated the exact same way. So it's always kind of crazy to me. Like these players get measured at the Senior Bowl or um, East West Shrine Bowl or something like that, and then they come to the combine and they've either grown or shrunk. So it's always kind of weird. But at least at the combine, you're getting same person measuring everybody. And so if this person has 34-inch arms, you know that compared to these other players, that's been measured the same. So I guess that's the big difference. Pro day, sometimes they can really work it to make the player look better. Like all of a sudden their 40 time shaves 0.2 seconds off of it. You're kind of going, is that more the facility or was that really what time they can run kind of thing?
yeah. I mean, certainly we all know that Philip Lindsay should have been invited to the line and obviously not just be strictly evaluated from the pro day. Um, because I mean, if you went well and even then he wasn't evaluated from the pro day because he blew people's doors off on the pro day and in particular with the 40-yard dash. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just one of those pieces to the puzzle that honestly, I think that just goes completely unnoticed. And I think that that's why there's more, and I mean, and rightly so, though, why there's more stock in, say, the all-star games for college football players, like the East-West Shrine game, like the Senior Bowl, and shoot, there's a third one in there that's um oh, what is it? It's like the NFL something.
NFLPA game.
Yeah, the NFLPA game. It's also like another college all-star game.
Yeah.
And and so there and rightly so though, because it's action. I mean, it is a game against, the top competition
Right.
from all conferences.
You're running actual football drills.
Yeah.
And so then you're seeing this small school player compared to this big school player. I think those games are more for the small school guys and their opportunity to actually prove that they belong. Big school guys, you've seen them against top tier competition, so you kind of have a better idea of what's going on, obviously. But yeah, I mean those are more important for the evaluation process in my mind than the combine. The combine, I mean the most important stuff is the medical checks and the interviews.
Yeah.
Those are the two big things. The stuff that happens on the field, there's value in it because you get to see their athletic traits compared to everybody else. So you have two cornerbacks that are very close together and one runs a 4.4 and the other one runs a 4.6. Well, I'm sorry. I'm taking the guy that ran a 4.4.
Right.
I mean, that just athletically, that adds to their ceiling being higher. But beyond that, I'm not taking too much credit into those drills unless they do absolutely terrible or absolutely amazing. And then you're kind of going, okay, this is an athletic freak that really, really has a high ceiling, can do something. You're looking at like Jadeveon Clowney. If you watched his tape, you're sitting there saying, this guy's kind of hit or miss.
Well, yeah, he was so inconsistent in college.
And then you get to the combine and you say, okay, yes, we see this guy is an absolute athletic freak and he's worth the first overall pick because he could become one of the greatest players to ever play the game. And so it measures in there, but even there, you're kind of looking at Clowney. Those first few years, he wasn't that great. I mean, he flashed, but he was still that inconsistent player. And it wasn't until this last year or two that he really started showing that he's worth being a top 5 pick in the draft.
It's almost like people were telling him, hey, your contract's up in a few years. Oh,
yeah, maybe I should play to get some big money.
Yeah. I think that's just, it's just sort of that fascinating dynamic, really, because guys like, and I talked about him in my predominantly orange article as far as the um, options that could be there for quarterbacks, and as spoilers, the options that I had were guys like, as Dustin Hayes mentioned, Jarrett Stidham. Jarrett Stidham was one of the guys that I mentioned. Brett Ripien was one of the ones that I mentioned. Ryan Finley was one that I mentioned. I actually do like Easton Stick, just because he's a gamer and he's part of a football powerhouse, and we all know notoriety still carries in the National Football League. And him coming from North Dakota State, which is not a say a noteworthy school, a Power Five school, but it's a powerhouse school that Craig Bowl created, and so I think that he'll generate some interest. I mean, but he's not as talented versus the other guys. He's just strictly a gamer. But the one guy, Carl, that I honestly am quite intrigued about, whether it is with the Broncos, and I guess we're coming full circle on our podcast, um, is Jacob Dogala, the guy from Central Connecticut. And I don't know if you watched much on him,
Not a whole lot.
but I do like him. I do. I mean, he's 6'6", like Flacco, and he made a few plays that did flash, and I think that he will get a shot. As far as in the draft, I don't know whether I can't tell you, because Joe Flacco went a lot higher than a lot of people anticipated. If we want to talk about comparisons, really, but I mean, Jacob Dogala is a guy that, I mean, he's not perfect. He's not going to flash. There are a lot of throws though where you come away like, whoa. I mean, there was one throw that he made in one of the clips that I saw where he threw a back shoulder fade or a back shoulder throw in the end zone. It was a straight bullet, and the cornerback couldn't do anything about it. Now, granted, it was a small school, small competition, so you do have to factor in a lot of that. But still, those types of throws, I mean, those are the hardest throws to make in the National Football League. And if he does it consistently, I mean, you're looking at one of those quarterbacks that just is just gonna wow and just move up those charts. But I just think of those small school guys that's where the things like the combine matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I mean, it's all these things. The biggest people that you see rising and falling on boards are the small school guys, because this is their first time really getting evaluated right next to the big school guys, all the well-known players. And for a lot of people, I mean, they've never even heard of some of these small school guys. Now, NFL teams, they've already heard of them. They've seen them. They've talked to them, all those kind of things. So their boards don't change as much as the media makes it sound like. But beyond that, it's just, these are good opportunities. And like I said, the interviews will be important. There's some players that really have to have big interviews. The quarterbacks, it could be what separates them of who teams like and where they go from there.
Look at Josh Rosen. I mean,
yeah.
honestly, look at Josh Rosen. It's probably what hurt him the most was the interview process. Maybe. What did you say? I mean,
well, yeah. I mean, I mean, Bronco fans wonder why the Broncos didn't like him. Well, it's pretty much those interviews. They were kind of turned off by his attitude, and they just didn't see that guy that makes the rest of the team rally around him. They saw him as a very smart quarterback. They thought he was a very good player. But when you're talking about the face of your franchise, you want that guy that every other player gravitates to. And Josh Rosen's just never been that guy. And for the Broncos, they're saying, do we really want to use the 5th overall pick on that guy? Where they're looking at Bradley Chubb, and they're saying, this is a guy that every coach that's ever worked with this guy loves him. Every teammate that's ever been with this guy loves him because he pushes him. He's a leader. He steps up. He leads by his actions, not just his words. He just has that motor that always wants to go. And they're going, that's worth more to us than going and getting a quarterback that we don't think is the true face of our franchise.
Yeah. Dustin Hayes says the best part about the Scantarello hire is guys like finding the next Nick Mullins. And um I mean, and it also goes to fitting of the offense too.
Yeah. Well, and that, yeah, you factor that in because he's not afraid of the small school guys. He's not afraid of the later round guys. He wants to spend time with them. He wants to develop them. This is the biggest thing when it comes to this new coaching staff is they have teachers. Munchak, known as a big time teacher. Scangarello loves those little details and working on the little things to make a player better. Donatel, he's another that is big on, we're going to work on your footwork. We're going to work on these little things. And Scangarello, that's one thing he's taken everywhere he's gone is I got to teach this guy. I have to, one, develop the offense around this guy. And two, I got to develop what he has as a skill set. Not ask him to be something else, but turn him into the best version of himself. And so that's the great thing with what we have right now. And that's why I'm excited. And that's why I want to get a young quarterback now. One, before Scangarello becomes that next big head coaching hire that everybody's looking at. I mean, he's kind of getting pumped up that he could be that guy, especially if the Broncos go out there and have success with the young quarterback. But right now, I want to get that guy in the building so he can have a year or two to really work with that kid and develop what they're trying to do and see what the Broncos can bring to the table. Whether that's the first round pick in Drew Lock or Murray or Haskins, or whether that's a third round pick in Stidham, or if it's fifth, sixth round pick and another player, whatever it may be. But get a guy that you can start developing and try to see what you can turn them into.
Yeah, it might be a Jacob Dolgala, or it might just be, a guy like a Ryan Finley, which, who knows? Bradley Chubb's probably talking to John Elway's ear and Matt Russell's ear and just saying, hey, this Ryan Finley guy actually could be pretty good if you just get him a system and such. So I'm sure there's always players talking up their players and so on and so forth. So I don't know. It's just, but it is that fascinating time, really.
Yep.
It is that fascinating time of year because there's always going to be news, whether you see it or not. Whether you see it or not, there's always going to be news.
Yep.
Carl, I say we end it. What do you say?
I agree with you, man. I need to go to the bathroom. I probably shouldn't say that on air, but
I'm with you though. Like I just think that we were at that point where, we should just, we don't want to wake up tomorrow and all of a sudden be hoarse, with our voices and be like, why was I? Oh, that's why.
But no, we'll have to do this again, man. This was fun.
No, this was fun, and hopefully, once the draft goes around, because I think when I did it last year, I don't know if I did it with you. Maybe I did do it with you. I know I did it with Eric and Sayre, but we did a sort of a live mock draft where we did sort of like a nice little run through, pick by pick by pick, type deal. We sort of selected who's going to go where. I like to do that again this upcoming year. So, and it's the draft, and Carl Dumler likes the draft.
Yes, just a little bit.
So anyway, thank you guys very much for tuning into the Cameron Parker Show. I know it went a little bit longer, but hey, again, I absolutely love Carl and him coming on the Cameron Parker Show podcast. And Dustin, thank you for contributing and all the insight about Stidham and Nick Mullins and your comments also. So thank you much for everybody that will listen to this when it gets published and so on and so forth. It's always a blast to talk about the Broncos and just a bunch of other things. I mean, this is the first time I think that I talked about the Denver Nuggets, and it was with Carl, who works mostly with the Denver Broncos. So it was fascinating. So thank you guys very much for tuning in, and as always, go Broncos.